Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Heart of the Cast. Joined by a special guest, one James today, and of course Josh, as usual. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Hello.
How's
Doing good,
how's
doing good.
things? Good, good.
Things are
So
good.
tell us about who you are first of all, so we can get a little bit of context as to why you're here to discuss specifically the concept of set rotation in Yu-Gi-Oh. What is your experience with Yu-Gi-Oh? Where are you at now, etc.
My name is James. I go by the one James on YouTube and Twitch. Been focusing a little bit more on YouTube now. I do Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic rates Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic cards. I do both of them since I was a very good Yu-Gi-Oh player, and I'm also a very good Magic player now. I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh, now playing Magic, but I know both games pretty well. A lot of my friends, most of my friends are still playing Yu-Gi-Oh, so I glean off that to learn like new things. I don't know as much about brand new Yu-Gi-Oh as far as like last couple ban lists or whatever, but that's my context behind that. I have my highest placement in the tournament was third place at OYCS. The first one that Kamal Crooks won, I got third place in that one. He beat me in top four, but it was a really good match, and I have a few other YCS placements and a bunch of regional tops and stuff. But then since I think like the year after COVID or right in the middle of COVID, I switched to Magic and never returned to Yu-Gi-Oh.
That's really interesting because I specifically wanted to bring you on because you have like really high level experience in Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's a great dynamic to have someone who's like shifted over from Yu-Gi-Oh to Magic, because you understand both games really well at a high competitive level, and I think that's definitely the subject matter today because we want to do set rotation in that context. And I suppose all other contexts as well, not just competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, because I'm sure you have your fun decks and stuff that you play in Magic and have played in Yu-Gi-Oh previously. But yeah, in terms of like, I guess like don't want to dwell too long on it. I'm just really curious what your reasons were for the shift over to Magic from Yu-Gi-Oh during COVID. Like, why did you give up one game for the other? What sparked that, and why did you maintain it?
There were two things that sparked it. One was my. I'm sure you guys know who Cool Stuff Inc. is. They're my LGS. So I'm in the middle of Central Florida, so they're my LGS. I played there Yu-Gi-Oh. They only had like on Friday nights you could either play Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic. They didn't have a day to play both games if you wanted to play both games. So
Hmm.
I literally had to choose one, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, you should try Magic with me." So I played Magic, and I couldn't play Yu-Gi-Oh because they didn't have a tournament on a different day. So that was a weird reason. But I think the main reason was that during COVID, when you couldn't go anywhere, there was no good way to play Yu-Gi-Oh online. Like, yeah, there was Dueling Network and then Dueling Book, which I played a lot, but I grew to like really hate those platforms,
Hmm.
and there was nothing like MTG Arena for Yu-Gi-Oh at all, and Magic Arena was
Was
the
Arena
main reason I
out
switched
back
to
then?
Magic.
Because I know that Arena
Yeah,
is fairly new.
yeah, it came out like the year before COVID. I think it came out in like 2018 or end of 2018 or 2019.
Hmm.
And I started playing it around end of 2019, early 2020, and that was like when Adam Emancipators became like really good, I think. And I didn't want to learn that deck. And it was like getting into COVID. We couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. But what I could do is be home and play Arena. So that's what I
Fair enough.
did, and that's kind of like where I stayed. I guess the
Mhm.
reason why I stayed and didn't go back, I mean, I went back in spurts. I went back a couple times. I went back to play a couple different decks. I topped a lot of tournaments with Sky Striker, so I tried to play Sky Striker like 2 years after it was like really, really good. And then I just stopped playing it. I played in spurts, but it wasn't anything lasting. But Magic's been pretty lasting as far as like from middle of 2020 until now.
So what, like, why didn't it stick? Like, is it a case of you? It's not like you don't like Yu-Gi-Oh. It's just that you just Magic just does it for you more, or was there like a turn off to Yu-Gi-Oh specifically, or like, do you know what I mean? Is it more that not that Yu-Gi-Oh is bad, it's just you prefer Magic, or is it a case of something happened with Yu-Gi-Oh that you just don't like in terms of direction of the game, whatever that made you go to Magic? Like what kind of aspect is it?
Yeah, I think it was like the direction of the game being like back then it was like build a board, break a board, and I didn't really like that game style.
Hmm.
Um, and then
It's changed a
there
lot
was a period,
recently, to be fair.
yeah, yeah, there was a period, but then there was a period of time where it's like if you didn't have 2+ hand traps in your hand, you kind of automatically lost.
Mm.
So I guess it was a combination of a couple, maybe two or three formats in a row that was just like, "Ah, I don't really want to play Yu-Gi-Oh. Playing Yu-Gi-Oh with my testing partners, and yeah, I believe that we're a really good group. Notably, one of the head judges that has judged Worlds and judges all the YCSs and head judge Josh
Josh,
Maharnik.
right?
He's one of my
Yeah,
best.
yeah.
He was my best man at my wedding. He's my best friend,
Wow.
and
Well, good company keeps good people. I love Josh. We've had him on, I think, a few times
Mhm.
on here.
yeah, he's an awesome person. He had the most amazing thing to say at my wedding. Like we all cried. It was crazy. But
Oh,
anyway, but our group of friends, I think, are really good at Yu-Gi-Oh. And being friends with Josh isn't a bad thing. But it just became like us testing at his house was like we both put our hand out in front of each other and we didn't even play the game. Like we were just like, oh, you win this game. And and,
yeah.
Yeah.
and like I kind of like the in Magic where you don't know how the game's going to progress every
Mhm.
game. Like you know what you want to accomplish and you know what your opponent's deck wants to accomplish,
Mhm.
but like you don't know how that's going to progress until like turns and turns and turns later. Like whereas it like in Magic a 15-minute game could be 8 turns and you don't know what's going to progress.
Mhm.
A 15-minute game in Yu-Gi-Oh could be your opponent comboing for 12 and a half minutes. You trying to break the board and then the game's over. So or the other way, like your opponent combos for 3 minutes and you sit there and make one action, they make a counter action, and you think for 5 minutes and then you scoop. So it's like the gameplay is just a little bit different than what it was back when I played Metal Foe True Draco, and that's what I got third place at a YCS with. And I felt like the gameplay was, I mean, the gameplay was honestly pretty bad back then. There was an FTK in the format, but I feel like it was just better back like maybe like 10 years ago than it is now, and that's kind of what like slowly progressed me playing Magic instead of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough, and I think that's also something that the Yu-Gi-Oh community has kind of agreed upon, that like the last couple of years have had that little bit of a problem. And like currently, I feel like we are in the progress of dialing
Undoing
that
that,
back a
yeah.
little bit, but it's like yeah, I think especially for the period that you quit in, I think it's a very fair impression of the game during like 2021 to ish. Yeah.
It was pretty
Yeah,
egregious, yeah. That was a huge power
it was
spike
just
with
a
that
combination of
Emancipator and stuff.
yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things. It was that, and we couldn't play. I feel like
Yeah.
if I could go, I feel like if I could just go to Josh's house and play, it probably would have been fine. Maybe I wouldn't have liked it anyway, but I don't know. It's hard to know.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Master Duel definitely was in that sense, like globally, just that little bit late. I feel like we could have obviously gotten a huge
Imagine.
spike in players if we just had that game, just a little bit earlier. I mean, we've been wanting that for way longer, but in this particular context, of course,
Mhm.
like just 2 to 3 years earlier would have been just really beneficial for building a community.
Definitely. And like a lot, my favorite thing about Yu-Gi-Oh was the back and forth aspect of it was like your decisions mattering, and
Mhm.
I feel like in Magic I mean they matter in Yu-Gi-Oh. Don't get me wrong, but they matter throughout the course of the game. I think more in Magic because you don't know what's coming next, whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh it's kind of like outside of hand traps, it's kind of like you definitely already know. I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it as well, but
You just mean like in
you
terms
know,
of the
yeah.
combos that are going to be done type of thing?
Yeah, like your opponent has interruptions. You know what could be. You know what's probably in their hand. You know what's on the board, and you just have to solve the puzzle basically.
Mhm.
And with a lot of decks, with decks like Eldritch and some other decks where you have some decisions whether like where to use your trap cards and interruptions.
Mhm.
eh, it's a little bit easier in Yu-Gi-Oh I think to just always come to a certain outcome. Because Demonic Tutor is a card that says in Magic that you search any card in your deck, right? Uh, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's just like a bunch of those, so you always get to do the thing that you want to do unless you're interrupted. But in Magic, it's just not like that.
So I guess like the
You,
archetypes and win conditions are a little less linear in Magic.
Yes,
Okay, fair enough.
and
Yeah, what I'm
I was
getting
just
is
a
you
second
don't
player.
you really value that sort of like uncertainty when you start a game of Magic, that like you're not gonna know, because the game is designed to have like to go over multiple turns, that like you don't know exactly how it's gonna go.
Y- yeah, I think that's part of it, and
Yeah.
a lot of times like Yu-Gi-Oh players will say, oh well, that's RNG, like that's that's so like bad or whatever because it's so random what you're gonna draw next, and you're planning on your next draw being good or whatever. But I think that's a big part of what makes games fun is not knowing what's coming next and not exactly just solve the puzzle. There are Magic decks that require you to solve puzzles and Magic gameplay patterns that require you to solve a puzzle to find lethal or whatever. But I feel like that's more so in Yu-Gi-Oh than it is in Magic. I'm a Sky Striker player, so one of the 200th YCS that I made day two. Unfortunately, I made top 64, but I didn't make it all the way or whatever. I think Manav Dewar won that one, but I lost in top 64. But I played against like five True Draco opponents with Sky Striker, and it was like my favorite matchup ever because I felt like all my decisions mattered. I
Yep.
felt like every little thing I destroyed mattered, and I felt like
Hmm.
every little opportunity I didn't give or gave my opponent to make a player mess up. Like really, I loved Yu-Gi-Oh at that point and playing like that matchup specifically. It just felt like all my decisions mattered. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't think that's the case a lot of the time. In Magic, I do think that's the case.
Well,
Yeah, fair.
I personally don't agree with that, but I think that's a
Yeah,
something we don't
I,
have to come to terms
yeah,
with right
yeah,
now.
yeah. We don't have to argue about that or whatever. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think decisions in Yu-Gi-Oh matters. It matters a lot, especially in deck building things like that. I just think like throughout the course of the game, the like the uncertainty is I guess I actually never thought about it this way, but I think the uncertainty is a good thing. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, so the context established there, I suppose, is really good to know from where you're coming from. But yeah, obviously the target discussion is set rotation, and I guess we can probably just start
Yeah.
off like very basically and simply, like what that is. Because a lot of listeners might not be like they kind of hear this word about like card pools shifting in and out, but like what does it practically mean uh, in Magic? And I suppose we can probably after that, start talking about the potential of something like that existing in Yu-Gi-Oh, what that would actually mean.
Yeah, in Magic, they've had a few different types of set rotations. There was like block constructed, which means that they would print like four sets in a row and then have that as part of its own like little group, and then they would rotate the like half the block and then make a new and eventually make a new block, and then you would have a new block, and you do it like 4x4 like that. Uh, they stopped doing that a few years ago, and they decided to do a rotation. This is only standard, by the way. There's a bunch of
Mm.
different formats of Magic, but just in the format that actually rotates, which is standard, is also considered the entry level format for people to get into Magic. Now it's like more Commander, but back then it was standard. You would have like a year and a half to 2.5 year rotation where your cards will be legal and then it would rotate out and they would cycle through that. Now, as far I think it was maybe about a year ago, they decided that they being Wizards of the Coast decided that they wanted to do 5 year rotating standard, which made me laugh. But
That's
now, like
huge.
yeah,
What?
yeah, now the card that you like hate playing against the most, you're going to play against it for 5 years. So that's a little bit of a wrinkle that we
Is
haven't
that
seen
Mhm.
before in
confirmed,
Magic,
or
but
was this just something they were
oh yeah,
discussing?
that's confirmed. No,
Wait,
that's
you
confirmed
guys are
already.
getting
Oh yeah,
5-year rotations?
yes.
Surely, if anything, like less time is better than longer, right? Because if any problems come up, then they shift out faster. But I suppose on the opposite end of that, your favorite cards stay around longer.
I
I
think
mean, that's
that's
what we're here for, right? That when we're discussing pros and
Yeah,
cons
fair
of set
enough.
rotation, right? Like we're gonna get into those,
That's a lot though.
right? But like I
I
think just conceptually, right? The idea of set rotation, I guess we've established is like at whatever the time frame is, right? Like you're rotating sets out of your format to
Hmm.
make room for new cards, right? Just very fundamentally, like whatever how long it's gonna take. Um, you make the decision to rotate out sets, and like what would the reason for that be? Because I think from the perspective of a Yu-Gi-Oh player, I think the initial reaction of people would be like, why would that be a good thing to like take away these cards that I've like paid for and not be able to play them anymore? I think that's the initial reaction to anyone who's so used to not having it. Whereas
Hmm.
like if you're coming from the other end and you've always been playing with rotation, you would always be like, hey, why would you ever not do this, right?
yeah, it's like it's so different because Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have other formats to play with those cards that were your favorite cards,
Hmm.
unless you play Edison or just like play make up a format with your friends to play.
Hmm.
Cube is a good idea for this. Like if you really love to play with, Swords of Revealing Light back in the day, you could just like do that in Cube.
Hmm.
But there's no like set from Konami way to do that outside of playing like Goat format or some other format. In Magic, you have a lot of formats. So even if you have a card that you really like to play, you could just make that deck in Modern. You could make a deck with your favorite card in it,
Hmm.
even if it's not one of the best decks in the format or something. You could play it in a different format. And you can also play it in Commander. So you don't actually lose the fact that you can play with your card. You just lose the fact that you get to play with your card in the setting that you play with your card, in the format that you play with your card.
And what do
Um,
you think? What do you think the advantage of set rotation is?
the advantage for set rotation is so that you don't have to power creep into oblivion. Like you
Hmm.
don't have to power creep the most previous good card, and you don't have to power creep that card
Hmm.
in 8 months to a year.
Hmm.
And that comes down to having to have a ban list because you can't power creep enough. So they're definitely two different philosophies, but the advantage of it is that. But I think it's not as much of an advantage if you
Hmm.
don't have the other formats to play. I think one of the big
Okay.
reasons why it's good, why standard rotation in Magic is as good as it is, I think, is
Hmm.
because you get to still play with your cards in other formats.
Do
One of the
you
reasons.
experience that as being something that like the majority of people actively do?
It's a really good question,
Because what I'm trying
and
to
I,
wrap
I
my head around is like I haven't played a game yet that has like a bunch of different formats. I'm trying to understand like if you're a Magic player, are you mostly going to be playing a couple of different formats, or are you going to be mostly playing the one that you like the most?
Because I suppose the equivalent of that would be like in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's like, oh, well, you really like Sky Striker, so do you just play like that snapshot Time Wizard format of something from 2018, or do you just become like what, like I suppose like a vintage player or something would be the equivalent where you only play. I suppose traditional would be the equivalent. I suppose right where you
No,
only.
vintage is our advanced constructed.
Oh, right, I see.
Vintage is just everything.
There's so many to keep track of here. But yeah, I guess the question would be like, would you play Sky Striker in?
No, like the question in general is like I'm sure there's both, but like the majority or the average Magic player, do they play one format because that's their favorite, or do they like dabble around with all of them? Because I feel like at that point it
Okay.
it, it might become a little overwhelming. But like I'm just trying to hear you, for example, you personally, is there one specific format that you play, or you play all of them?
I play almost every format.
Okay.
Is that standard? Is that common or?
That is, I think that's the minority,
Hmm.
but
Mm,
I would think it would be like a 40-60 minority. Like most of my friends, actually, all of my friends that play Magic play multiple formats. But
okay.
Okay.
I'm not a solo. There's a ton of solo Commander players. They only play
Yeah.
Commander,
Yeah, no,
and
that 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 was the
they couldn't
one
even
I feel like
conceive.
that
Yeah,
was the odd one out that I would think a lot of people, because that I feel like is a completely different, I mean, not completely different, but it feels like a kind of different activity than from playing 1v1 competitive Magic. Then just I feel like Commander is much better suited for like getting together with a couple of friends and just having like a the table game of Magic, right?
yeah. For those of you who don't know what Commander is a multiplayer. The standard is playing with four different people in the same match, basically, and you all have double your life total. So it's like if you sat in front of three different Yu-Gi-Oh players and you had 16,000 life, and you got to play against everyone else, and it's like winner takes all, and whoever wins. You don't share any aspects of your hand or the board or anything, and you would just play, and you would see who wins. Like, and if one person has Ash Blossom, you can stop one person's thing, and the other person has Call by the Grave, and they can also stop the other person's Ash Blossom. It's just like literally free for all.
Yep.
Uh, but in as far as the question, Yu-Gi-Oh not Yu-Gi-Oh. Commander is more of a hangout
Yeah.
than for most people than it is like a competitive thing. If you
But I
only play
think
competitive Yu-Gi-Oh and you tried to play Commander, you would like be upset or something.
no, people do that in Yu-Gi-Oh. It's actually very fun too, because there's an equivalent of it in Yu-Gi-Oh too that I've tried, and I think well, currently it's kind of like on the rise. I wouldn't say it's popular yet, but it is very, very fun, and it has a very cool element of like self-balancing to it. Because Yu-Gi-Oh is like you say, Yu-Gi-Oh is notorious for like a higher power level, but the way I've experienced it in that format is like if one player just tries to get a little crazy on their first turn, um, they're gonna have three people against them, right? And that is kind of a very cool self-balancing factor that I've experienced
Yeah, it is
in that
very
format.
self-balancing, and it's
Yeah,
also you can also make custom ban lists. Like you can make your own house rules. You
yeah,
can, but it's also a 100 card singleton,
yeah.
which I forgot to mention. So it's like way different. But
I forgot it was
regardless,
hundreds.
um,
Jesus, that's it's
But it
pretty
is also
immense.
singleton.
yeah,
The Yu-Gi-Oh version is also singleton. It's
yeah,
60 cards, but yeah.
60 hundred.
yeah, 60 card singleton. You go. I haven't played that before, but I would actually like love to play that like one time. I don't know if I want to continue playing it, but I would love to play it to see how it is like one time.
It's
But
very
as
fun.
far as yeah, okay. Uh, yeah, maybe I'll try that with like my cube group or whatever. But as far as Commander like relating to like your question would be maybe some people just only play Commander. Some people play
Mhm.
Commander and Standard. Some people play Commander and Modern, and it's just
Yep.
you know you basically play a bunch of different formats and play one of them more than the others. Whatever your
Okay.
favorite one is.
Yeah. And the only one that has rotation is standard, right?
Yes, and technically draft and sealed.
Because you're just using the current stuff to draft with.
You're using standard cards to draft with
Okay.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
open packs. Yeah.
So is modern basically traditional for us?
No,
Modern.
modern is advanced constructed, but if it started in 2010.
Right. Okay. And what
Yeah, that's
percentage?
that's true.
And which one is more popular, standard or modern? I guess standard.
That's a tough question too. It's pretty equal, I think. I would have to look at like
Really?
actual metrics for that. I don't have actual metrics for that,
Do they post
but
that type of
I would
thing?
say it's pretty equal. I I'm sure they do. You can find someone on Twitter probably
Hmm.
that has the stats or something. But since I
Okay.
haven't looked at them, I can't give an answer. But it's probably pretty close. But Commander is by far and away the most popular format.
Okay.
So
Well,
how does that work in like a local game store setting? Because you said, for example, there was only one opportunity during the week to play Magic at your local game store. And I'm trying to get to like if the system of having a bunch of formats might have some downsides as well. Like, is that just like you're gonna have to like that one format? And if you don't, then well, there was no other tournaments for you, or would they like rotate the formats and you would basically only get to play your format every 5 weeks or something?
You'd play your format
rotate
one. You
the fucking tournaments.
I
That's
mean, if there's only
crazy.
yeah
one tournament a week, you got to decide on
Yeah.
a format, right?
yeah. Well, the way that Magic usually does it, and the way the card stores do it, is that they'll have one format per every other day. They're like, oh, this is our commander day.
Hmm.
This is our standard tournament. This day is our modern tournament,
Okay.
and just do it like that.
Okay.
So if I only played standard, yeah, I would only play once a week. But
Mhm.
if I played standard and modern, maybe I play twice a week because the store has a different day for both of those.
Okay. Yeah.
So I assume modern is more powerful, right, as a type of format, right? Because you just have more cards available to you, right? It's like a higher
Yes,
type of ceiling deck. Okay, cool. All
like
right, interesting.
it's way different than comparing it to Yu-Gi-Oh because Yu-Gi-Oh has a power creep aspect to it. Um, s- so
Well,
like if
modern
you
must
said,
have
oh,
a
what's
power creep aspect to it, surely, right?
it
If it's
does
not.
it yeah, it does have a power creep aspect to it. The reason why I say it's different than Yu-Gi-Oh is that like if I asked you the reverse question, right? What's more powerful, uh, Yu-Gi-Oh from Edison till now or current Yu-Gi-Oh? Like it's like I don't know the same.
Mm, right, I see what you're saying. Yeah. But I think like just having a bigger, wider card pool will always have the more powerful format. But that's like a side point anyway. That's not
I
really
mean, the,
Yes,
the
relevant.
the
side point.
argument, I guess, the argument is that like power creep is just not as um, it's not non-existent in Magic. It's just less powerful, quote unquote, right?
Yes, yeah,
It's less
they power creep
spikes.
very a lot slower since there's a rotation in standard. They don't have to. They can power creep some things to generate hype from cards and get you to buy things, of course.
Mm.
And make more powerful cards over time to fit into modern and legacy formats. And
Yeah.
they have to do that because if you never do that, then modern and legacy formats never get any change of cards. So
Yes.
they
Yeah.
they purposely put cards into standard that could be an upgrade for a modern or legacy deck that
Mhm.
probably would be unplayable in standard.
Okay,
Oh,
but
that's
wouldn't
really
that like
interesting.
okay, because if they're still trying to cater, they're not catering specific sets for the formats, right? It's not like they're releasing like sets for specifically legacy or something like that.
Well,
They
they are,
actually do
right?
that, not for legacy,
They
but
do
well,
that?
they actually do that. They do it for both legacy and modern.
Mm.
It's called Modern Horizons.
Okay.
Those are also legal in legacy, and
But not in standard.
They printed three of those. They're not legal in standard and not legal
Mm,
in Pioneer, a different format. But
okay.
Pioneer is basically modern, but I'm not going to explain it anyway. Um, it's it's like modern. It's like
Yeah.
current sets all the way back to like 2015 or something.
This is like a cutoff
Whereas
point.
modern goes back farther. Anyway,
Okay.
I'm sure
so
I'm sure
Modern
this all
Horizons,
makes a lot of sense to everyone who's deep into Magic, but as someone
yeah.
who's just looking at it from the outside or just scratching the surface of it, I do feel like it has an aspect of confusion to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm trying to make it easier for Yu-Gi-Oh
Yeah.
players to understand.
Yeah.
But as far as your question, they do make sets specifically for modern.
Mhm.
They tend to just rotate modern, which is a good topic for this discussion. They tend to power creep the heck out of modern because they're trying to revamp modern, get people excited about modern again. Oh,
Mhm.
play this format. We have a bunch of new cards for your favorite deck.
Mhm.
But they make the absolute most busted, powerful cards like you've ever seen in your life.
Okay.
And one of them already, a few of them already got banned, like the One Ring, for example, that a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players even know of.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
Legacy 2, the Legacy power creep that they do is a little bit different. When they come out with a Commander product and it's designed only for Commander, they make them really powerful because it has to fit into a 4-person setting. But what if you
Mhm.
put the 4-person setting really powerful card in a 1v1? It becomes like absurd
Yeah.
because they make Commander sets specifically for Commander, but those are also legal in Legacy.
Hmm.
So it just
Okay.
makes Legacy power crept also.
Okay. Um yeah, I'm just
Is
trying to wrap my head around whether this is
Well, I think like a good sort of question is really so, I'm trying to like follow all of these different aspects here, but just as do you think this is a good like thing like when you have so many formats like you do have the opportunity and the variety that you can pick whatever you want to play, but at the same time like isn't this kind of overwhelming? Isn't this kind of spreading thin your player base? Because if you
Yes,
could because if you have
go ahead.
like a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament that you can run, it's like, oh guys, let's play Yu-Gi-Oh. It's like 90% of the time you're going to assume it's like current format, right? And then you just have like let's say a 50-person local. But then if you have a 50-person local and then you split it between modern standard, you just kind of divide your player base, and if it's like a 60-40 split, assuming that's kind of like the numbers, well then you just have 30 players playing one tournament, 20 and another. And then you bring in more different, tournaments and it's like, okay, well here's draft and here's um vintage or whatever other format. I just think like maybe you risk sort of really alienating a lot of people because if you design a card and you make a set, it's like standard players might really like this set, but modern players really hate it, or vice versa. Like, do you not end up with situations like that?
I don't think so because usually if you're just a modern player, modern's your favorite format, you play a bunch of decks of modern, and a standard set comes out, you're not like, oh, that set's not for me. You're like,
Hmm.
what in this set can I put in my deck? You're like, what's my improvement? Like, what's the card they're going to bring
mm,
into my deck now? Like,
Hmm.
that's what you're thinking about. You don't, because if you're a modern player, you probably don't care about standard unless you play both formats. So who cares? Who cares what standard gets? I'm looking for what my deck could get.
But do you not think that's
y-
like? But you're still, spreading thin your players that way, right? Because if you don't care about that other
Yes.
format, it's like in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like, well, and you could look at it as a bad thing, but you have to play modern, right? Like you have to just play Yu-Gi-Oh in the current setting for the most part, right? Unless you make your own formats or Time Wizard, and even Time Wizard is
Yeah.
somewhat niche at the local level. It's more of a side event YCS thing, like that as an example. So even though some people might begrudgingly don't want to play Yu-Gi-Oh or something at that time, there is only really one way to play Yu-Gi-Oh. So you just have more players, and that's a good thing in some ways because there's just more people playing, but Magic, I feel like, does spread thin their player base because you just have so
Yeah.
many viable formats.
Yeah, like imagine you have 8 people and you have 8 different backpacks full of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and you say, "Oh, let's do an 8-person tournament right now." You could probably just do that because everyone has like a regular Yu-Gi-Oh deck.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that for Magic and you look at all their backpacks, like one person's taking their commander deck out, one person has a pioneer deck, one person has a standard deck, one
Yeah.
person has a modern deck, and you can't even run a tournament. So that actually was a big point of concern for the pioneer format that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Was that, oh, we have all these standard players that like really loved these couple cards in their standard deck. What if they just start playing pioneer? Like our 25-person local could now just be like 12 players. I don't want to play in a 4-round cut to top 4 tournament. Like, I would play. Obviously, I would want to play in a tournament if it's available. But like, I much prefer playing in a 25-person tournament than playing in a 12-person tournament. Like, are half of these people going to play a different format? And so you eventually do get to ask the question: what if Pioneer and Modern like didn't exist? Like, would you just have like a 60-person standard local? Like, I'm gonna say like probably.
Mm.
I'm not, and it would be interesting to talk about the upsides and downsides of that. Like if
I think,
Pioneer and Modern just didn't exist.
in general, I would say the more ways to enjoy a card game, the better, right? Just like, if there's additional ways to play the game, that would just sound like it's a straight up net positive where like you have a different option. If you currently like this format more, then you can play that. If you prefer another format, you can play that. I think at some point you do run the risk of like, if you can't guarantee that for each of these individual formats you're always going to have enough interest, then you do run into certain problems where, and I have experienced this at local game stores when I was there playing Yu-Gi-Oh, when like other people would try to get like a certain tournament for a certain Magic format together and there just wasn't enough people. So like, instead of like, I don't know, 30 people splitting up into two groups of 15, it was more like initially they would have like 10 to 15, and that was split up into groups of like 3 or 4, and at that point it didn't even make sense to really run a tournament anymore.
Mm.
Right. And so like you got to balance the upsides with the
Yeah.
downsides. Like, yeah, there's an upside.
Yeah.
You can play all these tournaments. Like, there's so many options for you. If you really don't like standard and you don't like rotating, you don't like your
Mhm.
cards not being playable anymore, and you want every card that you get for your deck to be able to be played, then maybe you like modern better than standard. It's higher power, so you have to learn to adjust to the power level and all these different things.
Yeah.
But you can still play with your card that you like.
Yeah.
Whereas in standard you can't do that, but it does dilute the player base.
Yeah, I think in that regard, I think it's the sort of thing where it's like a high risk, high reward kind of decision to split your game up that way. Because I think if it works, it's great because you're giving people more options. But it does have a higher risk of just not working out for certain formats or certain people who just happen to like the less popular formats. In that
Yeah.
sense.
I
On
think
the
that's
on the thing we mentioned earlier about like the confusion, I think for like really invested players like yourself, I don't think it's going to be a problem. I don't think anyone who's like already invested in Magic will ever have a problem with it. What I've heard about from time to time and what I've already experienced myself is that I think it's more like a barrier of entry type thing where people who are not as invested as you yourself in Magic won't really know exactly what to pick up, or like maybe end up buying a product that they end up not being able to use, or something like that. That's something I've experienced myself because I've looked into Magic at some point in the past, and I was just like a little overwhelmed by which cards are legal for what format and where to look for resources for whatever format, that kind of thing.
Well, there's a couple different websites
Yeah,
that are very, very good
yeah,
at like card legalities and things like that. So
yeah,
but the problem is you have to go to the website. Like, it's an
yeah,
extra barrier to like,
yeah.
I don't want to have to go to this website and like figure out if this card's legal or not. I just want to like get the cards, play with my deck, and you can definitely do that in Yu-Gi-Oh, which is really cool about that.
Hmm.
I was laughing while you were saying what you were saying because it just happened this past Friday night
Hmm.
at locals at
Yeah,
FNM is what we call it in Magic.
yeah.
That we got a promo pack for everyone gets a promo pack for making either top cut or being in the tournament at all. And every card was not legal in standard. Like, we were playing standard, no card
Yeah,
was legal in standard. Nobody knew
yeah,
what these cards were.
yeah.
And the only way you know what the cards were is if you like play commander. So
Mhm.
it's like the promo packs were even geared towards you playing commander. So,
Yeah.
but we're not even playing commander.
Mhm.
So it's just like it would be we were talking about it. It would be really cool for the promo packs just to like have the cards that you can play in the format and just know that you can play with the cards in your deck if you wanted to.
Yeah, it seems like something that's just it puts a lot of responsibility on the publisher of the game to make sure there's like so there needs to be like sufficient product catered towards the specific formats, I suppose, and like price support as well, because no one wants to like receive a card for a tournament or a prize pack for a tournament that has cards that they can't play. At the same time, the more product you release, the more different product, the more different price support. That's also confusing because I don't know, you're gonna launch like 7 different product lines for 5 different formats or something. That also
They do,
sounds weird.
yes. They just do that.
They just do that? Okay.
Yeah, they
I don't
do
know.
that.
That sounds confusing to me, but
Yeah, just clarify as well. So, I know in Hearthstone you have a core group of cards, and then you have like everything rotates around it. Does Modern have like like a few core cards, or does it like rotate every single card? Is
the modern
gone.
doesn't rotate.
Yeah, modern's
Standard,
non-rotating.
sorry.
Oh, yes, standard rotates every card, like lands,
Every single card.
like little
Wow.
tiny things, like literally every card.
Okay,
But they print
interesting.
like a base set at the beginning of it, right?
Well, that's what we just had. That's
Mhm.
actually the thing that they just started was foundations, and that's the 5-year
Mm.
thing I'm talking about.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
which is a core set. They used to be called core sets, ironically, but it's a
Yep.
core set of cards that is like Hearthstone's base set, where it's like
Mhm.
always legal, basically. And they're gonna in like 5 more years, they're gonna like come out with a new foundations, and that's gonna be the core for the next 5 years.
Would you
And
say
during
that?
those 5 years, is there going to be any other form of rotation, or is it just everything that
As
comes
far
out?
as I understand it, as far as I understand it, there will still be rotation as like 2 or 3 year rotation, but
Okay.
that 5 year like time period of foundations will still be legal through that.
So they're rotating the booster sets every three
Yes,
years, but they're rotating the foundation set every 5 years or something.
yes.
Well, that's not that bad, I guess, right? Because I was thinking when you say like 5-year rotation, it's like imagine like 5 years of Snake Eyes. But it's like, okay, the base set, I assume, just based on my knowledge of Hearthstone, it's like maybe lower powered cards, maybe some staples, like kind of more generic stuff, or is it
Yeah,
like, okay, like
there's
that's
some
not
good
too bad then,
cards.
right?
Yeah, I mean there's some good like format defining cards in there. Like there's
Right. Mhm.
for example, if I related it to Yu-Gi-Oh, it would be like, oh, these in this 5 years, you get like Ghost Bell, Ghost Mourner,
Hmm.
and you get Ghost Bell, Ghost Mourner, Called by the Grave, and Imperm,
So like some
and
good
then
like
like that's
kind of
what you
basic
get.
stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
That'd be
and
kind
then
of
like the next
cool.
5 years, it's like you get like Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, and like
Mm.
Solemn Strike, and that's
That
just
is a
there for
very
5 years.
cool. That is a very cool concept. That's also how I remember it when I've talked to. I had a couple of friends back then at my game stores who played Magic, and we would talk about it every once in a while. And like the way I understood it worked back then was kind of similar. Maybe the year cycle was different, but it was always like at the beginning of the rotation they would release like a base set, a foundation of like staples to build your deck upon, because I figure like a normal size set would probably not be sufficient to build a bunch of different decks. It probably wouldn't be very diverse or anything like that. So they have like a big foundation set at the beginning that brings you like the staples and lays the groundwork for what the format's going to be like, and then they release more sets into that.
Yes, yeah, the
Yeah.
base set wouldn't have archetypes in it. Basically, I mean
Mm.
they could have like little things here and there, but it wouldn't be
Yeah.
archetypes that are dependent on a
Like
different
maybe like
card
a
in the archetype.
Pancratops and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, it lays the
And
foundation for the staples you're gonna play with. Like, for example, I don't know, maybe they would put like in this rotation, you're gonna have like access to Heavy Storm as your prime back row removal, but then next rotation maybe they would leave it out of the core set, so you'd play a couple of years without Heavy Storm, and it could eventually maybe even come back in the future if they felt like bringing it back.
So are you
yes,
guys
and the
just
same.
on one set right now for standards?
Yeah, standard is never one set. Right now,
No, currently
it's
right
the
now.
it. Yeah, right now it's foundations.
Oh, Foundation
I'd have to
plus a
look up the
set.
actual set. Yeah, it's foundations plus like
Oh.
4 sets that
Oh,
are in standard right now.
but didn't you say you guys just rotated?
We just rotated, but they rotate. They like say there's 4 sets that are legal like right now in standard. The
Mm-hmm.
next rotation you would rotate out like 2 sets, but 2 new sets get printed.
Oh, that's a lot.
Like one set gets printed, and then like a few months later another set gets printed. So you'll
Okay.
eventually
So
like
it's
it
not
basically
like
like
rotation
cycles out.
is here's foundation and then here's a core set, here's a core set, here's a core set, and like spread
It
out
never
over
starts
time.
from scratch.
Yeah, no,
Right.
it never starts from scratch. They don't just like dump all the cards and then print like 4,000 new cards right away. They slowly rotate them out.
Interesting. Okay. Oof, that's a lot to process and think
Yeah,
about. But the idea of
I
a foundation set, I think, does sound really cool for Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Because I mean, just bringing this back to Yu-Gi-Oh, like I think like a lot of people do have a lot of fatigue from seeing Ash Imperm Veiler for like
Hmm.
the ninth format in the row, right? So I mean, if you were to have like you gave great examples of like here's a couple of here's a couple of the girl fucking ghost girl cards. And then okay, next set here's like one or two of the Ghost Girls. Here's an Imperm, and then like here's now Solemn Strike. Like I think that could be kind of cool. And I guess like asking you specifically because you have a lot of experience, um, in Yu-Gi-Oh. Do you think that could be something that could work at least conceptually? Do you think that would be a good idea for the game? Do you think it would be a smart thing to do?
it, I think you would have a lot of players that used to play Yu-Gi-Oh that stopped after Pendulums that
Hmm.
would come back to play Yu-Gi-Oh in a heartbeat if you did that.
Think
So
so?
many Yu-Gi-Oh players. Yeah, yes,
Hmm.
definitely. Even if you remember when Pendulums first came out,
Hmm.
and it was like you had Odd Eyes, you had Odd Eyes and a couple vanillas for Pendulums, and you could
Hmm.
just like play those, and you could sometimes Pendulum summon.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you had that structure in a Foundation set. You had like a few cool cards that work with Pendulums, but it's not like Cliffort or anything.
Hmm.
And it's not like Electromite FTK.
Hmm.
It's like here's the building blocks of like everything you could do in Yu-Gi-Oh. You get Rescue Rabbit you to facilitate like rank fours or whatever. You get Rescue Rabbit plus like some other thing. For like a Exceed deck, you could also have like a Blue Eyes deck that could be some level 8 stuff. It's almost like cube like in a way for like a Foundation set that you could have generic cool synchron cards that goes for synchro stuff, and that's your building blocks, and then you have sets that are printed in there to kind of like feed off of that in a way. I think Yu-Gi-Oh players would love that. I mean, I think I would love that.
It could definitely be done in a way that would be very fun. I do see some problems with it because what I'm thinking is like you would have to probably make different sets for that format. If you just do that, you just lay a foundation of like let's say some older concept in a base set for the new rotation, and then you just add the normal Yu-Gi-Oh booster sets into that. People are still gonna play the new stuff, right?
Well, yes, but I'm not. I guess I'm not saying that the stuff that you put in the foundation set has to be like almost unplayably bad.
Mm,
It's more of stuff that are just like really good generic cards.
yeah,
Like that I couldn't just name off the top of my head, but
yeah.
like if you like certain cards that are tech cards into like current day like rank 4 decks, for example.
Mm,
Like I don't know if you have that because I'm not super familiar with like how Ryziel plays or whatever.
mm,
But say you had like a good card that you would just play in this deck,
yep.
but that card is in the foundations, quote unquote, for
Yeah.
Yu-Gi-Oh.
I think
Like if you can you name like a tech card that you would play? Can you name one? Maybe it's like a yeah, Josh or Farfa, either one. If you can name like
you
a
know
current deck
better
that
than
has
I
like
do,
a
Josh,
tech in
for
it, that's good.
TCG.
Well, like a tech card from back in the day,
No,
or
like a current deck that has like a really cool
Like
fun
flex
of tech
flex
or whatever.
spots, I suppose, in
Yeah,
the
like a
extra.
flex spot tech. And maybe either an extra deck or the main deck is what I'm talking
I
Well,
about.
mean, there's a lot of like older exceeds that are being used in these kind of decks. Like Exciton Knight is seeing play in Ryzeal, for example.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
guess that
like
would be an
for
example of
example,
that. Would
Exciton
be
Knight would be a good card to have like in the
Yeah.
foundations of Yu-Gi-Oh.
mhm.
The
And
way I would envision it for Yu-Gi-Oh, because I do think it has to be a little different, because Yu-Gi-Oh is fundamentally different to Magic in another way, which is the whole like archetype versus just colors, right? Like for Magic, it's like six different colors, and you can kind of work within those. Whereas for Yu-Gi-Oh, very often you are constricted to your own archetype. And so what we do a lot of the time is like we add like legacy support, or like archetypes are dependent on the rest of their archetype to exist. So I do think a foundation set for Yu-Gi-Oh, if you ever did do that, it would have to have the, like let's say in the current line of core booster sets, they're aiming to, or they're currently making legacy support for things like Orchist or Six Samurais, which is happening. Like Six Samurai already happened, and Orchist is getting support this year. That sort of stuff they would have to like reprint in the base set, I think.
Mm, yeah, you could have. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Would they put the new updated versions of old decks into the Foundation's format
I feel like they
if
would
they
have
if
to
they
because
were to do it?
otherwise, like Yu-Gi-Oh is like not made to be drafted with. That's because a lot of those cards depend on other cards. Like they can't just
Yeah,
give like Dragon Maids a new fusion monster and then just not have all the Dragon Maids in the format. Or yeah, they could make structure decks, right? They could reprint Orcus cards in a structure deck at the same time that they release the new support in like a core set, making them legal for current rotation, like all the cards you would need, basically, right?
yeah, they can do that, but the rotating Yu-Gi-Oh that we're talking about would obviously be less powerful than Yu-Gi-Oh is right now.
It would still be
Right.
that because, like, let's say you're taking Snake Eyes for as an example from last year. In just in like advanced Yu-Gi-Oh format, like our standard, you would just be able to play full power Snake Eye with all cards available. In the one with a base set and a and just like the core sets, you would still get all the Snake Eye cards, but might have not gotten a lot of the extra deck pieces, for example, that the deck would go into because they
Right.
are like they haven't rotated.
Right.
So, like,
So you're
on
saying that
Snake
they
Eye
would just
release,
put
you
those
would
into
have
the
been
set.
able to play all the Snake Eye cards, but in the rotated format, you wouldn't have Appaloosa, IP Masquerena, for example, if they didn't choose to include those in the foundation.
Well, right. Either they would have to reprint those into the foundations because they're so generic, like Appaloosa,
Mhm.
or they would put they would like make new Yu-Gi-Oh cards that could be a good card in that deck, but just not as strong as Appaloosa, for
I mean,
example.
but they also just wouldn't have to do that, right? Because like then that's what you're trying to achieve, right? You're trying to have people play less powerful versions of those decks.
Yeah, but I
Wouldn't
mean that would
that
also be.
wouldn't that would kind of like if you print replacements for them, wouldn't that like kind of ruin the whole point?
Well, you wouldn't be directly replacing the card. You
Yeah.
would be able to play that card, whatever that card is,
Hmm.
in other decks if you wanted to, like
Yeah,
Agave
yeah,
Dragon or whatever.
yeah,
Like Borlo Dragon. It would
yeah,
just be like a card that you would make in this other version of Orchist with the
yeah.
new Orchist cards instead of like Appaloosa plus this extra deck card plus that extra deck card.
Yeah, exactly. So like you're basically at that point you have like the full power format where it's just going to be Yu-Gi-Oh like it is now, but then there would be an alternative format where stuff gets rotated and they reprint like I don't know, they make like an Orcus structure deck and because Orcus is getting support this year, and then you get to play Orcus there. Of course, you could still play Snake Eyes over there because the cards are also new, but you wouldn't be able to play like Snake Eye. It would have a lower power level, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that would probably be fun, especially since you get to the format is kind of like tailored by Konami in a way
Mhm.
where there's still going to be a best deck. There's still going to be a second best deck. There's still going to be like a metagame, whatever, which is
Oh
good.
yeah.
But you would have that those cards for a certain period of time. They get rotated, and new decks come in. And yes, it would force you to build new decks and to hone new skills, playing new strategies, which is one of the things that I like a lot about Standard as well, about Standard in Magic.
Mhm.
And I think that would be really fun if you had like a foundation set that maybe you have Orchist, but Lancia is not legal, right?
Yeah.
or you have Orchist, but the next rotation Lancia gets reprinted. So
Mhm.
now like the format changes
Yeah.
because maybe Orchist is legal now, but they just reprinted Lancia.
Yeah.
So it's like yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
no, the reason
pers
why I mentioned it in that way is because I think to at least keep it somewhat realistic, I think the most important thing for Yu-Gi-Oh is like the game has been going on without a rotation for like 25 years now. I think completely like you can't change too much in one step.
yeah,
So I would like my approach is like maybe it would work if you just added one alternative format that doesn't like alter our set structure in too many ways. Like you can still release normal sets, and for anyone who doesn't want to bother with the alternative format, they don't have to. They can just keep playing the regular format. But I'm trying to make it just be like an additional option, basically, for the people where like normal Yu-Gi-Oh, quote unquote, has just too much power creep.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually what Magic did. I think with Modern, is that they're like, okay, from this point forward, we're gonna have this other format that you can play that you
Yeah,
don't have to play, but
yeah,
and you can just totally ignore it if you want to, and just keep
yeah,
playing regular Magic, but you have this other format
Yeah.
that if you wanted to play it, you could play it. I'm
hmm
trying to think of like what if Foundations in Yu-Gi-Oh was just Edison, like everything that is in Edison is just Foundations,
yeah.
and then you just build everything beyond that. Like there's still a lot of good cards in Edison. There's still like Drill Warrior, and there's still like I think Effect Veiler and different things like that. But like what if that was the case? What if you did there's just a lot of things you can talk about with like a foundation set being in Yu-Gi-Oh. I think it's interesting to talk about it, and I know for a fact that I would play something like that if it existed.
I would too. Yeah, no, I would. But I guess the question at that point is like, I think the thing that's weird about modern specifically is that the longer it goes, I feel like the more weird of a decision is to just make like an arbitrary cut and then just never rotate after that.
Yes.
Because
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you're just gonna repeat the same problem of power creep with that. Because that now they're starting to add. You mentioned it earlier, where like they made another cut, but like 5 years later, and that's now a new format. Was that Pioneer?
Pioneer. Yep.
Yeah. So are they just gonna like keep doing that? Like keep cutting every 5 years and be like, okay, now you get a new card pool for this never rotating format.
Like
Well,
a
wouldn't
different, never
the
rotating format.
well, wouldn't
Yeah.
wouldn't that basically work like this, where current Yu-Gi-Oh would basically turn into modern, and then we would have a new alternative format, and that would just be standard, where they would introduce
Yes.
a base set
Yes.
and then yeah. So like, I mean, just listening to all of your points here, I'm sitting here and I'm like personally struggling to see a disadvantage to this, right? I think having an alternative format that you would bring in with a foundation set, something you could start with something as low power as like Go, and then you build upon that with like some chaos
hmm
cards, some chaos sets, bring in a bunch of like machine sets, like that kind of like old school Cyber Dragon type of thing, right? And then you just kind of go from there, and then
Well,
five.
in your example, are we printing sets specifically for that format?
So do you mean like getting into the semantics of how product would work?
Well, in your example, you're like, okay, starting today, we have modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is now called modern, and we're introducing a standard format where here's your base set of 500 cards that are legal,
Mhm.
and now we're starting a rotation and we're releasing sets. If like Supreme Darkness releases next week, is that legal for both formats, just modern, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really
I have
good
an answer to
question.
that.
Go on.
It would be illegal in both formats.
Okay.
Because that's how I would ideally, if I had the task of designing something like this, is that would be my goal, is for the sets to be just in order to be as not confusing as possible and also make it so that the sets can be as successful as possible. Um, I would think it would need to be legal for both formats.
Mhm.
It would. It would be illegal for both formats.
Yeah.
They would have to.
Change how
They
they
would.
design cards in those sets.
Yes.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
would have to change how they design cards in the sets because they're going to be in standard and they're going to be in a foundation set where maybe the best turn one play is normal summon rescue rabbit, or like
Mhm.
that might not be the best play in current Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
but you would still have new sets come in that are legal for standard, that you would have a card in it that is like amazing for uh you know a different deck. Like
Yeah.
is Ryzeal's not hit any yet, is it? No, it's
No,
No.
not,
not
right?
TCG.
Okay. So like say they print a new set and this new card that they print is like amazing in Ryzeal, like changes the game, it's like super
Mhm.
insane for the deck, but
Yep.
it's just in standard. You would just update your Ryzeal deck and play that new card, just like we do in
In-
modern for standard sets.
but then why would it only be good in standard?
No, not only. I'm just saying it would be good in both formats. Is what I'm saying. Like
Okay, okay,
you
okay.
would, yeah, like you would have your modern deck that you play, and then if a new set gets printed and like most of the cards are not going to be good
Hmm.
in this new design philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Most of the cards are not going to be good for your deck, but maybe one card or two cards per set is like game changing for that format.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you would basically have to be designing your sets henceforth to pretty much fully cater to standard, but you would want a couple of things that you would then bring into modern in the Yu-Gi-Oh equivalent, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I feel like that this sounds kind of good. Um, you
It
know,
sounds good. Yeah, it sounds good as long as you're not splitting player bases. Like that's I think that's the one danger here. Like cuz as long as there's enough people for both worlds, where both people are now in, like, both groups are interested in putting up the set and getting the cards and stuff like that, like there's demand for the set, so it works out, and like that seems good all around. It's just a added, like, it's just a benefit because you're going to be able to pick whichever one you like, right? The problem is where it start, like, what if the effect is, for example, on a group of like a local game store that consistently gets like 12 to 15 people? What happens if suddenly 6 of those want to play that format and the other 6 want to play the other? Basically, that's the risk I'm seeing, right? Because then suddenly you can't really put any real tournaments together anymore.
yeah,
So
that
the
would be the
risk
problem.
is, like, are you going to find enough new players that joined because of that alternative format that you can run sufficiently large tournaments for both?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
The Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
was I think that the approaching this from a different angle, and I guess we can talk a little bit about Arena and how that works. You're never going to have an issue of population online, and I think like having that as some sort of testing ground would definitely be huge, because I don't know the details of how Arena works, but in Master Duel, you just like play current advanced format, and sometimes there's a couple of mini events, and that's it. That's your gameplay. Now in Arena, like I'm curious, like where do you naturally get funneled into when you play online in Magic? Is there multiple different equal options to play standard and modern, or what? Like what is the structure of it? Because I generally don't know.
You cannot play modern and back on arena. You can
Huh?
only play. Well, you can, yeah, you can play Pioneer and which is a different format on Arena, but it's basically Pioneer. It's called Explorer. It's like Arena's version of Pioneer. It doesn't have 100% of the cards in Pioneer on the client, but
Mhm.
but like every good deck, every important card basically is on Arena for that format,
Okay.
and you get to play all of Standard on Arena. You can also play all of Draft and Sealed on Arena. There's a different format
So,
called
so the
there's
card
a,
pool is
there's a,
exactly the same in real life as Arena for standard.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you can fully test standard up the ladder and test for your next locals on arena in standard.
Thing.
That's
But you
crazy.
can't play modern or modern
That's
realistically.
crazy.
Or
We'd love that.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
No.
what I did. That's what I did.
Yeah.
No, no,
It's
Well, for
funny.
that
Like
it's I was being
yeah,
ironic because it seems like such an obvious thing to do and we don't have it.
I don't know if you know the context, but Master Duel card pool is not in line with TCG or OCG.
yeah. I
Like,
know. I know that. Yeah, I
yeah,
know that. It's so
it's
weird.
it's a strange decision. But I think it would be because Josh, you're right. Like you just I don't think you could get enough. No matter even if it's like the best thing ever, you are absolutely just going to split your player base when you introduce something as big as this, which is
Mm,
why I
Yeah.
think like the best way to approach this is to introduce something into Master Duel, um,
mm,
because that would be the proving ground, and you would have literal data and analytics
yeah,
that
Such a
they
good
could
idea.
look at.
That's such a good idea.
yeah.
And they would be able
That's
to
that.
see like, do
Yeah.
people like this new alternative format that's being played
Yeah.
on Master Duel? And you could design in real life accordingly.
Yeah. Because
That,
I genuinely do feel like, as great as it sounds to just have like an additional option, from like a more realistic perspective, if I'm looking at like the size of, for example, the locals that I'm going to, if that happened, I do think it would cause problems because it would have people like, I would rather play this. I'm not going to play that anymore because I just think that's a more realistic thing for people to do. Realistically, keeping up with the trading card game format is very time like intensive,
Mhm.
and keeping up with multiple formats is difficult. I'm experiencing the same thing, like staying super competitive in Master Duel and TCG at the same time, even though it's the same game with the same rule sets. It's difficult, and like I think the reality for most people would just be they're going to play one of the formats, and that's the one they prefer.
Now I have a caveat to throw into there.
Hmm.
What if Konami said, and this happens in Magic, so that's why I'm mentioning it. What if Konami says the next YCS is the new format?
Well, I mean, I personally would then grind that format. No, but I'm also the kind of guy who I would play both anyways, just like I'm playing Master Duel and TCG. But I
Mhm.
am noticing that with Master Duel and TCG, there is a lot of people who don't play both. I would even say I'm not sure if the majority only plays one, but like there's a lot of people that don't play both.
Yeah, because ultimately, like,
Yeah.
our life revolves around the game and we're content creators for
Yeah.
the game. So we will play no matter what, right? But for the average person who has X number of hours per week to dedicate to their card game hobby, like, you kind of are sort of just forced to pick and stick to that because you just don't physically have the time to do multiples.
Like
Um,
how would that be different than like Battle Pack, like a Battle Pack tournament that Yu-Gi-Oh has like already done?
like a Battle
See, I
Pack
love those,
YCS.
but they didn't perform very well.
Right.
They weren't
So
that
how
bad
would this be
contextually
like
to their
different?
standard, though, no?
You mean like to the time?
Yeah, like a Battle Pack YCS. When was the last Battle Pack YCS? Like fully, it was like.
2013.
Yeah, so I mean, do you remember what the numbers of the attendance was for that YCS compared to
If
other
I had
YCS
to,
within
I
that
don't know
time
guaranteed,
frame?
but yeah, I would estimate around 300.
300 players. Well, I remember, for example, off the top, I know that YCS Barcelona around about 2012, 13ish, I think was about 500 players. So you're not completely out of the realm of uh
No, it's not like completely terrible, but it is like a solid 40% less.
hmm.
Oh, well, think about this. It was a solid 40% less, but did Konami officially make Battle Pack a new format? That's I think that's the
No, they
difference.
didn't. They definitely, it's like the kind
Yeah,
of thing where I could see it starting off weak, but then growing over time, 100%.
exactly.
It just feels like currently they're not willing to make that step. It's the same thing with people asking for like an Edison format YCS. I would 100% go and play that. But I do kind of understand why they're not making it happen because I do think there's a lot of fear attached to like how many people are actually going to show up. Um, but
And
I mean
and
I
then we
would
have to
love that.
like if they did that, a lot of the different aspect of why Konami wouldn't do it is like what are they selling? What are they selling in the like? Are people? Is there that many Edison cards?
That's the
You
thing
know,
with Time
what
Wizard
are
as
they
well.
selling?
That's
You
why
know,
like a rotation format would even be a better alternative way to for them to offer Yu-Gi-Oh, because
exactly.
like they're not selling a lot of new cards because of Edison format. I mean, there's a couple of cards
Exactly.
left that they can still reprint. Like people like if you do put Royal Oppression and Trap Dust Shoot into like Rarity Collection or whatever in the nostalgia pool, that is a selling point for that set. But you will run out of those cards eventually. There's only a
Yes.
limited amount of cards that you can profitably reprint out of Edison format. You are gonna run out if you
Exactly.
and I mean that is also something that I don't really understand is like they are kind of recognizing the need for alternative ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh. We're getting hundreds of people joining Time Wizard tournaments. It's just from their perspective, it would make so much more sense to actually create alternative ways that they can then print new cards for, instead of it just having be that one set time frame that never gonna get new cards.
Yes, and that's a big, ironically, selling point
Yeah.
for making a new format slash set rotation slash standard, whatever you want to call it, is that they both have a new format that people can play, and they get to sell product with it. They don't get to sell product with Edison. So I mean they do, but exactly what
At
you
least
said.
I know what you
But
mean. At least
they get
not
to
to
sell
the extent that they
completely new
could. Like,
product.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they get to sell completely new product with the new with the new format that we're talking about. So
Mm,
there's no like dead end to it, you know? They can keep like rotating it out, making new cards, rotate that out, make new cards, rotate out, make new cards. There's no dead
mm.
end to it. It's like a cash cow for them. I'm surprised that they haven't done it yet, honestly.
To be fair, they have to an extent tried to make a new format with speed duels. which kind of was what we are referring to. I mean, we can argue about the exact execution, but that was like, hey, we're gonna reset. Here's an alternative way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's slower. It's got some gimmicks to it with skills and stuff like that. But we're starting with a fresh card pool. All the other cards aren't legal. You can only play the cards that are in Speed Duel. Lower power level. You've only got 3 zones. So on and so forth. Um, and I
I think
mean, that didn't
I
work.
think I think I think it didn't work because it's too different than Yu-Gi-Oh.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
like the reason why I didn't get into it is because I was like, ah, 3 zones, weird skills. Like this is just not Yu-Gi-Oh to me.
I
I
mean,
feel like
the
you have to
gameplay
make it.
itself, though, the gameplay itself is kind of it is similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! Way back in the day. It's not that different. To an extent, it's what people are asking for because it is a way slower. Like, it's not that different to like Goat format, for example.
Yeah, but even when you look back at Goat format, you're like it kind of still feels like it's weird. It kind of still feels like you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh. Like there's the same core rule
Mhm,
sets. When you start changing like the core rule sets, the zones that you play with, I
mhm.
think that just messes it
Skills
up a little bit.
especially, honestly.
So,
I
so
think
you
it
That's a
think
was
you
skill.
think like the core like the it's important for them to just mess around with the
current.
card pool, not the rule set.
Yes, and
Okay.
also the physical way to play the game
Mhm.
with skills that are kind of outside the game and
Yeah,
with
that's what I meant by
limiting.
rule set, but, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I get what you
Because I
mean, yeah.
think like most people who
limiting the board state.
Like Yu-Gi-Oh because of the way it is. A lot of people have issues with the game that are kind of outside of that core mechanic, right? It's like card power level, cost barrier to entry, right? Like fundamentally the gameplay of Yu-Gi-Oh is what is it most attractive. And I think
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, if they just play around with the semantics of the card pool, um making things slower or focusing more on like, just as an example, right? Because like in today, when Suda came out as in this day and age, right? Like imagine you had this alternative format we talked about with a foundation set, and then Suda
Mhm.
comes out and boom, Six Samurai is like the meta deck in this alternative format. Like that would probably bring back a lot of people, as
Yeah.
an example, right? So it would be good because I think people don't have an issue with the game of Yu-Gi-Oh at its core. I think people have an issue with like the card pool, which in turn affects the gameplay because it's too fast, etc., etc.
Yeah, I like what you said. Like, oh, we're in this new Six Samurai. Boom, it's new. It's in the core set. It's in the new standard. This is the best deck in the format. And
Yeah.
all the Six Samurai players are like, oh my god, I this is the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, it's I'm playing this right now, and they could do that for a whole bunch of different decks. And that goes back to what you said, Josh, actually in the beginning, whereas you would just put those new decks into the new format, which I'm starting to like more and more. I'm going to be devil's advocate a little bit here and say and say be a little bit contrarian and say like what about uh, I had a really good question that I actually totally forgot. I was going to say like what about the inverse, right?
Which is like
Like
people
what
not
if
wanting those decks to be the best decks.
no, I'm saying about the card zone changes. I actually remember what I was going to say about the card zone changing.
Hmm?
To be contrarian about it, the zones actually did change multiple times with the new master rules,
Yes.
and that was very divisive for a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players.
I don't think it
Yes.
was
Uh,
relevant enough because all that really changed was like you get less spell and trap zones for pendulum, which is like not that big
I
of a deal.
I do think what like about the zone layout itself, I think that wasn't as big of a deal as like but one thing I think Konami definitely learned in 2017 or 18 is that the whole rule change with synchros and exceeds, which was something that people have grown very attached to, when they made those just like significantly worse by forcing you to only be able to summon one into the extra monster zone,
Yeah.
that did not really stick well with people. Like they did not enjoy like don't tell me how to play with like my favorite cards from
Don't
10
tell me
years
what to
ago.
do.
That is what it was, right? Like
Yeah, for
people
sure.
really didn't like that.
yeah,
Um,
so I think it stems from people just not liking change, which I totally understand.
Yes.
But it's important to evaluate like how people actually responded to the changes that have already happened. Like the speed duel is just the inverse of like maybe the pendulum zone's changing and the extra monster zone thing changing. So eventually, maybe people can just come around to it. I don't know.
I think the way I view it is you would have to, because we've been playing this game for 25 years without rotation. I think you'd have to ease the community into it very, very slowly and very carefully, and ideally in a way that doesn't affect the main game of Yu-Gi-Oh too much. Basically, I think the only way this could ever succeed is if you really can market it as, here is just an additional option for you. If you don't like that, just keep playing the normal thing. That's still going to be there. Don't worry about it, right? The problem I see with that is it's never going to have zero implications for like a modern Yu-Gi-Oh player. Even if they don't touch modern at all, they just give you an additional option. It's still going to have the effect of like people wandering off to that other format, and suddenly you get like less people at your locals and something like that. Like there's no way to do this without impacting everyone essentially, and I think that's what makes it
But
so difficult after not having rotation for so long.
I think that's true, but I think it would be less difficult for Yu-Gi-Oh players to do that than Magic players. And Magic players, it literally is a different format. And yes, for Yu-Gi-Oh, it literally would be a different format. I think it's
Mhm.
a easier, and it's actually easier for Yu-Gi-Oh players, and it's because of this. Yu-Gi-Oh, in essence, has been rotating for a lot of years
Yes.
through ban lists,
Yes.
and just general power creep.
Yes.
Um,
So all they would be doing would be
Yu-Gi-Oh
officializing
players
it.
Yu-Gi-Oh players are used to this already.
Hmm.
They're
They
used to
are.
their deck.
Yeah.
They're
To
used
to
to
an
their deck
extent, I
not being
agree.
played anymore.
To an extent, I agree. To like the problem is that I feel like there is a psychological difference to your cards just being outdated, but you could theoretically still go to a tournament with them, and them just being outright illegal.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if Dark Magician, for example, I'm just going to use like a very fan favorite thing here. Even though those cards are not meta relevant at all, them being legal implies that they could get support at any time, and be meta relevant again. And I think you
Right.
kind of lose that illusion when you have official rotation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an
that is
important
true.
carrot on a
That is
stick
true.
to hold, I think, right?
I
That is
think I
true.
think this is where I've been wanting to ask this earlier, but I think there's another difference between Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic that I'm trying to understand better, or I think there's a difference because Yu-Gi-Oh is so archetype driven, where like I don't know if Magic players have the same attachment to like specific archetypes, right? Like is because I the way I don't know, this is a very outside perspective, but how do Magic players refer to their decks, and how do they like, is it more like, are you like a blue player, or are you, you know how in you refer to yourself in Yu-Gi-Oh terms as like a Sky Striker player, right? That's a specific archetype. That's a very small subset of cards. In Magic, do you refer to yourself more like a like colors or actual archetypes, or just like, I don't know, mid-range or control? What's the, how do Magic players
Yeah, what's the
identify themselves with
identities?
their deck?
Right. Magic players do have identities like that.
Yeah.
There's players that will never play anything besides something with blue in it because
Okay,
they like
but
because they like saying
it's
no.
not tied to specific blue cards, is it? Because blue
No.
shares specific identities over the course of different rotations, right? You can make a blue deck that feels very similar to the blue deck from last rotation. Because, like, I mean,
Yes.
also once again, very outside perspective, but like blue is the one with like a bunch of draw cards and counter spells and stuff like that in it. They can replicate that fairly easily and satisfy that player in the next rotation.
Yes. There's
Yeah,
a lot of different things outside of just the color. There
yeah,
could be like, oh, I'm a mid range. Like for me, I like mid range decks, and I like mid range decks, control decks, and big mana decks. Like do
yeah.
big stuff. Like
Hmm.
the example of like uh what's the big dragon deck that made the dragon that dumped like a whole bunch of dragons? Chaos Dragon.
Dark,
It wasn't
like
Chaos Dragons.
Dragon Rulers with
Magic
dark
ruler.
matter.
Yeah, Dark Matter, whatever it
Yeah,
was called.
The
yeah, yeah.
synchro
Um,
magic chaos ruler, I think, right?
No, no, he means dark matter
Oh,
dragon.
you mean dark
yeah,
matter?
Dark
Okay.
Matter.
Okay.
Yeah, the Dark Matter deck that just like could beat any. It could go bigger than any deck. Once it did the thing, it's unstoppable. Like that kind
Yeah,
of deck, you know.
yeah,
Um, and those are the archetypes of decks that I like to play. But I also like colors. I originally was a green player.
hmm,
I loved green. I played mono green, and then over time I was like, you know what? I kind of really like killing my opponent's stuff. So
Yeah.
then I became a green-black player.
Hmm.
Because the black color pool is really good at doing that, and
Yeah.
that's kind of like a little bit where I stayed as far as mid range goes. And I think that goes with a lot of people. A lot of people like Reanimator, which is bringing stuff from your graveyard back into the field.
Yeah.
And a lot of players have like a lot of different ways that they like to play Magic, and it's
Yeah.
cool that different colors have a different like way that they play Magic and the way that the cards are printed in the colors. So
Yeah.
removal in one color is different than removal in another
Yeah.
color for the most part.
Yeah.
And Magic players just really like their way of doing it.
Yeah. See, that I do think that's cool. I do think that's cool. Yu-Gi-Oh faces a problem here because the playstyle and identities are very much tied to not just like the type of cards. No one refers to their deck as like, oh, this is a typical dark deck or a typical wind deck, or even
Yeah,
typing is not relevant. Like, oh, that this is a classical warrior deck or something like that. We don't have that.
yeah,
They can't just replicate a deck from last rotation by just making, I don't know, a deck with the same attribute that just feels the same, right? They can't replicate. I mean, they can try to mimic a certain play style, but they're not gonna. You're not gonna be able to play Sky Striker unless the Sky Striker cards are legal, specifically those, right? And
yeah.
I
I think
think that is also an issue.
I think that's an issue from just a design philosophy's perspective.
Yes.
Like they don't make Beast Warriors do a specific thing,
Yeah.
so people aren't going to gain an affinity for a Beast Warriors playstyle because it
Yeah.
doesn't have a playstyle.
Yeah.
Like
No, I understand where it's
dinosaurs,
coming
yeah.
from. I'm just saying, like, that's a problem because we're 25 years in. So
You would think that they would do something about that by now.
I don't know. Maybe it could also
Well, it's
just be one of those
because
things where they think like it's too
it's
late, you know?
or it's not even that. It's just like it's just not a problem, I guess, right? Because you make an archetype and that archetype has its win condition, its playstyle, and that's just how that archetype works, right? Whereas in Magic, your archetype is more so tied to your color. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it is kind of a problem though because that's I mean we've been seeing this thing where people are.
Well, well, it's not really a
Mm,
problem in the sense that it's a problem, right? It's just a different approach. It's like instead of colors, we just have
yes,
archetypes.
okay, it is something that if you do it properly, it can be no problem. In practice, it's difficult because people are attached to archetypes from years ago that are not easy to replicate.
Well, I think
And
the simplest solution would be to just keep remaking those archetypes and keeping similar styles, right? Like, so let's
mm,
take as an example of like Salmon Great, right? You would just
yeah,
have Salmon Great would rotate out, and you would basically just make, in the new rotation, you would make Gazelle 2. It wouldn't obviously
mhm,
work the same way, but you would try and just make it in the same sort of vibe, right? You know, not to bring it back to like BA, for example, but there's been so many different iterations and ways to play
mm,
BA. I like all of them, right? Maybe it would
yeah,
work
yeah,
for some players, but if you were to just rotate out an archetype and then just keep redesigning, I mean, I think Pokemon does it, right? Like, there's been 19 different versions of Charizard, and One Piece has like
yeah,
7 different
yeah,
Luffys and stuff like that, right? Like, you probably can maintain the identity in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just in Magic they have colors, and Yu-Gi-Oh! We have archetype names. Um,
mhm,
but on on the opposite side of that, I guess they, in some ways, there is sort of like an identity. Like I feel like Cybers is probably the most obvious one. Like Cybers does have an identity, right? Like pretty much every Cybers deck does sort of
yeah.
function similarly.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's a good thing, right? Maybe that's not a
I
good
mean, it
thing.
depends whether you like it or not in this particular
Well,
instance.
the actual
Yeah.
semantics of the playstyle is irrelevant. I just mean
Yeah,
like Cybers is kind of known for doing and playing a certain way.
yeah,
So is that a good thing that it's type
Well,
based, right? Like
now,
Dragon
now
is
that I
also
think
another
about it,
example, right? Like dragons typically, I think, have always sort of been summon big guys, right? Like you have Boral Sword, Savage Dragon. Um, so I think Yu-Gi-Oh does have a little bit of that typing, but nowhere
yeah.
near.
I personally, I like this general idea when this happens. Like, I also, I'm still mad every time they make a psychic monster that doesn't pay life points,
Yeah.
or an illusion monster that can be destroyed by battle. That shit bothers me. Um, but
yeah.
yeah,
Even with water has it too, right? There's like they deal with a lot with the graveyard, right?
yeah,
There was the water link deck that just kept bringing stuff back from the graveyard. There was uh there was mermails that ever like worked with the graveyard, right? There's and then there's turtlements, they also work with the graveyard. So like there's like they have like a water graveyard kind of thing going on, but
mhm,
um it's not really anything that the type or attribute is supposed to do. It's more of like what it tends to do in Yu-Gi-Oh.
Those are
Does that make
also
sense?
more, I think they're more so exceptions than the actual rule. Like, yes, you will find decks or attributes that do certain things a couple more often, but in general, like you're mentioning a couple of water decks that bring stuff back from the graveyard, but there's like a ton more out there that don't. That
Yeah,
have their very own identity that's completely detached from that idea. I mean, there's even a
yeah,
ton of decks that consist of like all 6 different attributes or whatever. Like that's their thing all of a sudden. Like they're combining all attributes together, or just 2 of them or 3 of them, and like it feels kind of arbitrary in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where like that I don't think attribute and type is typically attached to something with very few exceptions. But you are right in the sense that you could still manage that in a rotation format. Where like, well, I guess we're just gonna have Salamangrate in this rotation this time, and then next time it won't be in there. Like we're gonna change it up. Like this time the salad players are eating good. Next time they're just not eating at all, right? Because I feel like that's the only solution. You either have it in there or you don't. You can't just have like a little bit of salad. Because if you don't print the foundation of Salamangrate specifically, then like that's not gonna work.
well, actually, what if you did do archetypes, some archetypes in it, but you just printed the foundational archetype cards? Like, what if you just had the quick play search spell
I
in,
think
Yeah,
in
no,
there,
that's
and
what I
you
meant
had
earlier. That's what I
all
meant
the
earlier when I said like, for example, they have Orcus support planned in 2025. So wouldn't it be cool to have the Orcus cards in the foundation set? So you're going to be like, okay, this upcoming 3-year period, you're going to be playing with Orcus. The one after that, maybe not, but for now, Orcus is going to be in rotation because it's also going to get new support. So, for
Yeah, that'd be cool.
example, yeah, because we've been having this discussion recently where sometimes legacy support comes out and isn't good enough for like constructed because that's our only format, but then it would maybe have a chance in the rotation format, right? Because it's getting
Right.
its basics and it's getting the support, which if you
Yep.
don't print the basics in the rotation set, it would be completely unusable anyway, so that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, and
Um
people would love that. It's nostalgic. Like they could put like the quick play, the Salamangreat quick play spell and the field spell, which is obviously what you need, and they could put like Balinks in there, right? And then
mhm,
and then you can have whatever other Salamangreat cards you feel like having in
yeah,
the they can just print those into the set run or whatever,
yeah,
but you have those core cards in there.
I'm personally
yeah.
going to very, very harshly push back on this idea. I would,
Oh
if I
no.
was, if I was to see a rotation format in Yu-Gi-Oh, I think I would hate for there to be archetypes in the foundation set.
Okay.
I think the number one problem with it is that what you're trying to do is address the fact that a lot of people want to keep playing certain types and archetypes and stuff. But I think the issue with that is um there's just too many archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I think you're going to be trying to be tailoring to too many different audiences, and I think you're taking away, and you that's just physically too many cards, because now you're taking spots away from all of the generic cards and all of the staples that would be, I think, from a competitive gameplay perspective, useful. Like, you're taking slots away from MST, you're taking slots away
Mhm.
from the board breakers, from the hand traps.
I
um
mean, we haven't talked about or reached an agreement on the size of the set, right? Like in theory,
Yeah,
it could
that's what I was
be
thinking.
super big, right?
but I mean, I
But
This
think
no, because
foundation
what
set
I'm
was like,
wondering is like okay, how do you envision it working then? Because if like let's say let's just use Six Samurai as an example, because that is very recent. How would that work? Because in modern, quote unquote, it wouldn't be viable because it's not good enough. And in the rotated format, it wouldn't be playable because there's a total of 2 Six Samurai cards.
yeah, I guess it is an interesting question. So I think what that does is that it goes back to product design. You would have to sort of build sets with this in mind
Mhm.
rather than um, do that to the core set, right? So I think,
So they
like,
should have the Orcust cards in like the core set.
no, I don't think so. I think, like, someone said it. Here's a good example. So the core set, I think, should sort of be like kind of like Rarity Collection, Duel Devastator, and then core sets Wait, so when you say core, I think
No, no,
I was
I
thinking
just realized
foundation.
that too.
Yeah,
We had a
yeah.
misunderstanding. When I meant core set, I meant like what we understand is like a main
Yeah,
booster
yeah,
set
yeah.
line,
So
like
the
the
foundation
one that
set,
releases the Orchid cards, essentially
yeah,
the
yeah,
new Orchid support.
exactly, exactly. So the foundation set, I think, should be like Rarity Collection, Dual Devastator,
Yeah,
those kind of things. And
yeah.
then core set should bring in archetypes and that type of thing.
So you would like to switch to a concept where our booster sets are no longer 100% new cards, but rather also include some related cards that are just reprints.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Okay.
I talked about this recently as well, because even if they were to do something like, irrespective of rotation, I guess this is somewhat of a different topic, but it's like introducing 100 new cards every 3 months is just like, you're just never you're gonna just have pack filler, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
why not just, instead of having so many new cards that 90% of them just never see the light of day again, what if they just
Mhm.
reprinted Ash Blossom in core sets? What if they had impermanent core sets? I think that would be
Yeah,
a
that's what
good
you
way
would
to
have.
do it.
That'd
Yeah,
be that
exactly.
I think that'd be a phenomenal way of doing it if just like the commons that you never play with anyways would just be like, well, here's Orcust Harp Horror again so that it's in the rotation format.
Yeah.
And it's I mean,
Yeah, you would do that.
it's not even like the standard players, the modern players are going to be mad about it. Well, because like I mean, that just makes the set better still. I mean, I'd rather pull like a reprinted Orchid card just in case I want to play the deck rather than pull a pack filler that I'm not using anyways.
Yeah, like a
Well,
materia-actor monster you're never gonna play, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
what's also crazy about the new about the new format is that you would have to play with whatever pack filler cards would be in there because the format's less powerful. So
Exactly.
you would want to play with some card that you would never play with.
Okay, I mean,
You would
okay,
never normally play
they
with
could
right now.
keep some pack filler in there, but right, I mean, we got to fit in the reprints, quote unquote, somehow.
Yes, you would do that too. But
Yeah,
your pack filler would be like a generic card, like that
yeah.
deals with water monsters or dark monsters or whatever. And you could also put in uh, the archetype slash typing flavor of it, like
Mm,
the type slash attribute flavoring of it, of like the pack filler being more like dark support
hmm
instead of archetype support.
Mm.
Make sense?
Yeah, like Allure could be in the set, or like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Luna,
yeah.
like things like that.
I mean, that's basically what the side sets are at this point, right? Like the
Yeah.
collector's rare sets that we have, they release like 3 new archetypes, and then they will come with a bunch of reprints where like
hmm
some of them are generic cards, some of them are cards that like fit into those archetypes. Or are supposed to
Yeah.
fit. Like how in the Malice set, there's Allure of Darkness as a rare, just for example.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do for the foundation set. For dark, you'd have a Lure of Darkness. For light, like they just like put they put some like random light card. I can't even think of one on the top of my head.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, like Christia is in the base set. Like
Yeah.
some card that people like playing with that might want to build a deck around again.
Yeah.
Archlord Christia, perfect
Yeah.
example, right?
Yeah.
As like a light or fairy card.
Yeah.
For like an Earth card, like they could put uh I don't know. Like it's just a good thought experiment to like have like a good Earth support there, have a good Wind support, and just make it like that. And it would make you want to play with those cards.
In a world where this sort of concept exists and is established and we're getting big enough tournaments for both formats, I think that would be great to have. I think the problem and the fear, I guess, for them is how can we make sure we get there without like maybe splitting our player base or ruining everything along the way.
Mm. Yeah. Anything that comes with sweeping change like this is always going to um create uncertainty, and we've seen it in Yu-Gi-Oh before, right? Like, I think Master Rule 4 was probably the biggest change we'd ever seen to the game.
Mm,
Um, it was extremely polarizing, but we had record-breaking turnout on event after event for all of 2018. So,
yeah.
like, I mean, there's big payoffs. It was a
Mm.
huge change to the game, but I think if you do, I feel like it doesn't really matter how much they change Yu-Gi-Oh. People who like Yu-Gi-Oh will keep playing Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Irrespective of
Mm.
what they do. I
I
just
think
get
that
that
depends
impression from
on
the
where
player
you
base.
stand. There's definitely different grades or different levels to which people love Yu-Gi-Oh, right? That's maybe true for you and me, but there's definitely people out there that that doesn't apply to.
But we kind of can see it play out in real time as an experiment with Master 04, all right? I feel like that was a big enough change that could have pushed so many players away. It probably did push a lot of players away, but
Yeah.
it did also bring a lot of players or grow the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do. That's why I'm putting so much emphasis on can we make this work in a world where it doesn't change modern Yu-Gi-Oh too much. I'm
Hmm.
trying to just have it be an
Yeah,
add-on
you would just
because
yeah, you
I
would
think
just say,
Mm.
oh, these players play both.
I think that'd be the most realistic way to make this happen because then you wouldn't really take anything away from people. You would just give them another option. I don't think anyone's going to complain about some of those, I don't know, world premiere cards or literal pack filler cards if they were just a couple of reprints instead, just to cater to the rotation standard format. And then just that standard format just existing, right? That'd be the only things that would change with that, right? We'd get a couple of more targeted reprints in main sets, and we'd have a different format that just exists on paper, but it doesn't like, I mean, it doesn't force you to play it. If you don't want to, you don't have to.
Yeah, give me Jurassic World, Fossil Dig, Rhoda, like
Hmm.
give me those in like a core set. Give
Yeah,
me Icarus Attack, you know.
And do you know what the
Give, give
cool
me give
thing
me those
about
give
that
me those cards.
is? And we haven't really talked about it at all, is that if you do that, Yu-Gi-Oh becomes a draftable game.
it does. Yeah, I was thinking that too earlier because then if like
Oh, so true.
if the support is in there with the reprints, you could actually open a pack and be like, hey, this synchro monster that requires a Materiactor tuner, there's actually a reprinted Materiactor tuner in this set now because we're reprinting something. And that actually makes it like something that you could do at a sneak preview or actually draft with.
Boys, I think we fixed the
I
game.
don't I don't
Like,
even know what
genuinely.
Materia Actor is, but there's some Materia Actor slander going on in this podcast episode.
Yeah, some people are not happy with me about that. I don't know. We didn't mention too much about it, but I guess it's kind of obvious. But ban lists, how would that work? Like, you would just have one for each format, I guess,
You
or
would, I think.
just that simple? Yeah.
I think you would, but you would not have to ban cards as often in standard, unless you printed a card that just broke the game.
Yeah, I mean, once again, for modern, it would just work the exact same way. We would have the
Yeah.
same ban list. It's just that, like, I mean, every once in a while, you're probably gonna print something in modern that is gonna be so good that it even takes over standard completely because it's still
Yes.
even like because at that point, let's say Snake Eyes without Appaloosa and IP Masquerena because those are not in standard still is way too powerful for you to be
Yes.
able to play any other kind of legacy support. Like it's still dominating even if it goes into other extra deck monsters.
Yes.
You would probably still have to do something about that.
Yeah. Well, and there would also be cards that are unplayable in the modern version of Yu-Gi-Oh that break the game in standard. Not that break the game, but are just like clearly too powerful, but
That
are
could
still
also exist.
unplayable in
Yeah.
Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
because all
also
of a
and that
sudden, I
also
don't know,
exists.
like Snake Eye Birch is crazy because yeah.
Yeah, that also exists in standard. There's cards that are banned in standard that are just unplayable in modern. But there's also cards that are banned in standard that also got banned in
Yeah.
modern, or cards that got
Or
banned in standard that
an
are very good
archetype
in
that
modern.
is an archetype that's receiving legacy support is just okay in modern but way too powerful in standard because the environment's less powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it would just they would have different ban lists, but I think they'd probably just ban things equally as often, but there would be different ban lists. I guess
Mm.
there's not much else to say about it.
Okay, so I mean, honestly, this has been super productive. Other than the risk of, alienating too many people with just like such a sweeping change and spreading thin players, which obviously is
Mhm.
a huge, huge risk. Is there anything that is kind of negative about this? Because I feel like there's overwhelmingly so many good positives to take away from this. Um, Especially when all of the suggestions we've had to things like set design and how that would change with rotation. I don't really feel like there is any negatives here, right? It feels like it would be a win-win in a lot of ways.
I would be interested to hear another negative besides what you just said, Farfa, about splitting the player base. I would like to hear if there's another negative. Like somebody give me something that's
Mm.
negative. I don't know. I can't really think of it. I can't really
I
think of anything else
personally,
negative.
yeah, it is a lot of work, but at the same time, I do feel like it would be worth it. Um, I can't think of a negative because the only thing we're changing for quote unquote modern Yu-Gi-Oh is that we're taking away some of the pack fillers, right? And it's like, I guess maybe there is a group of people out there who would miss those. I'm not sure.
Is there
I don't want to
though?
speak for everyone, but I kind of doubt it.
Because like pack filler in Yu-Gi-Oh is, and it's really egregious in Yu-Gi-Oh because there is so many cards in a set. Um, like what I like about pack filler in other games is that I can play with those cards by themselves. Like so
Hmm.
many times in Masdo, for example, we've tried to do dumb shit like, oh, let's open 100 legacy packs, let's duel. And it just boils down to like beaters because everything is so archetype based and archetype designed
Yeah.
that you can't draft and you can't play with things like that, right? So pack filler
Okay.
going away and not being shitty like, unplayable archetypes that need like 7 different cards to work together, and if you
Hmm.
don't pull one of them from the other set, then it just doesn't work. Then
Yeah.
I think getting rid of it would be a good thing.
There actually is another downside.
Okay.
You pay a few $100 or a couple $100 for a deck. The decks will be cheaper too in
Mm-hmm.
Foundations because the cards are less powerful.
Mhm.
Say you build your deck and rotation is like 8 months away because you just got into this format. Um, do you want to build the deck or are you waiting 8 months?
Oh, that's something we haven't even touched upon.
Okay, but
Because I wanted to I did want to talk about that, how that is perceived in Magic, like in terms of the value of the cards. Do you think it has an impact that people know for sure that these cards are going to rotate? Do you think that is a reason why cards are cheaper?
like real quick, like
Yes.
counterpoint, like isn't that what we already have? Like, right?
Yeah, that is true.
What, in
You have
Yu-Gi-Oh?
that in Yu-Gi-Oh too,
Yeah.
right? But instead of rotating, it's just banning. It's like I
It's
know this
yeah,
deck's
but
getting
it's
banned.
like once again, I do think there is a psychological difference between just like if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh for a very long time, you will know that this expensive secret rare you're picking up right now is either going to be unplayable in 3 years or maybe on a ban list or at the very minimum reprinted and worth a lot less. Like, you know that, right? Like, I have a bunch of cards at home that used to be 60, 70, $80 and are now 5 or whatever because, they've gotten reprinted, they've been banned, or anything else happened to them, right? We know that. But I do think there's a psychological difference between knowing that's going to happen at some point versus I know that's going to happen exactly in 6 months from now on that day.
Yeah.
Card is going to be illegal.
Yeah, so
Do you
how is
think
it
that's
like
better
in
or worse?
Magic? Yeah, what do you think in Magic? What's the culture like for players? Like, do you notice that there's a dip in attendance like when it's closer to the rotation,
There's
or like what
there's
changes?
only a dip in attendance when Wizards of the Coast announces an announcement. Like they do a weird thing where like they announce that they're going to announce something.
Okay.
it's like we're
Okay.
announcing today that we will be announcing when the rotation is, and it's
Okay.
like
Oh, it's not a set
between that
date. I thought
time,
it was just like set.
it is a set date, but there's been other times where like it
Okay.
wasn't exactly a set date.
Okay.
Um, Now they're much better at it now. Now there's set dates, and they say we're going to do this on this day, and then that's now it's better. But there's been times in the past where it's been like, oh, you're announcing it, but okay, this is the day that you're announcing it, but what about the time between? What about the time between you said it and by the time that it happens?
Okay, well, how
Then
about
you get
fast
kind of
forwards a
like
little
a
bit
thing.
to when it is announced? When set rotation is
Okay,
announced, how do players behave past that point to the next rotation? And
like
also
tournament
question how
numbers like
long
go
is
down.
that duration?
Tournament numbers go down like a little bit, and it's usually like a week or like less than a week.
Oh, they announce it quite late then.
Well, they announce when the new set is coming out, so you'll know when rotation is for a very long time. But it's just the time period is like a week between like when people like get rid of their deck
Mhm.
until they build the next deck.
Okay.
If
So
they
does it
want to
does
switch
it like
decks.
create a weird situation on the market where a bunch of people want to get rid of their stuff and everything drops
Yeah.
or
No,
okay.
well, that happens, but it's like really, really gradual over time, and then the
Mhm.
week before it it kind of goes down in price, unless the card's playable in Commander, then it stays the same price.
Fair enough. Yeah. I guess there is always technically another outlet to play the cards, which could help.
Yeah, there is another outlet that plays the card, so a lot of cards that are like would rotate out of standard stay the same price.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
example, it's a card called the Meat Hook Massacre, which when it was a standard was like $60 to $80. and then it got banned in standard, but it stayed around $60 because it was very good in commander. Still is good in commander.
I guess that could
So
be seen as a positive because, like, your investment, quote unquote. I mean, I don't like to think of cards as investments, but like, you wouldn't feel as bad as a standard player having paid that money for the card because you can still get rid of it even if you don't need it anymore.
yeah,
Technically.
you don't have commander in Yu-Gi-Oh, so it's not like super relevant to like even mention that. But
Mm.
if there was like a rotation in Yu-Gi-Oh and rotation was coming up, how close? I guess I'll ask both of you this. How close to the next rotation, and like your deck's getting rotated, would you like get rid of the deck or want to start building a new deck?
It would
Hmm.
put me in an awkward spot for sure. It would depend on what kind of tournaments would be happening. Like if there was a big tournament like a YCS happening a week before the rotation, I would feel forced to keep the cards if I wanted to play that deck at that tournament.
Yeah, I suppose the downside is Yu-Gi-Oh does not have another outlet to play those cards, so you are kind of
Yeah.
just like investing, knowing that you're going to play a specific event, or your cards are just gone in terms of usage. Because
Uh,
we are hypothetically discussing modern and standard, but Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have a commander where that thing could still be popular in.
well, I do want to get away from the like next event stuff because
Mhm.
Magic has done a good job at like not blowing up a format right before a big event.
Hmm.
Okay, so like
So
I mean, yeah, the event schedule is kind of built around the rotation schedule. You know, let's
yes,
just
yes,
assume we're doing this thing at a reasonable level where like you're not going to host an event like the day before something rotates
yes,
or
they
like
do
the
that.
exact day after. You're going to give people appropriate times.
Right.
In that world, that probably be manageable.
Like a month. Like you get rid of your like a month, a couple weeks.
I mean, the thing is, I can only like from the Yu-Gi-Oh perspective, I haven't gotten rid of my cards before like a reprint because I've still been playing with them. But a
Oh yeah.
reprint, I guess, is different from the card just not being usable anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that admittedly that would stress me out a little bit having to be like, "Hey, I'm gonna have to like take care of getting or moving all my cards like once every couple months or whatever, like get rid of everything because I'm mostly a standard player now and like I want to make sure not to sit on these cards until they're banned. So like I'm gonna have to go through all the work because I mean a lot of the staple cards that I have and stuff like that, I'm fine with paying the money for them because I know I'm going to be able to play with them for a very long time. And in the case of good staples, you are even able to play with them for longer than 3, 4, 5 years. You know, there are cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that are still relevant from way
Like
back.
how standard would go is that you would have a playable deck. You would have a playable deck, but like a certain pieces of the deck would rotate in the year, and then in like a year later or 2 years later, uh, five more of the or five or ten more cards in your deck would get rotated. So
Yeah,
it would kind of like be like that. It wouldn't be like you would have to change your deck every 3 months.
but
It would
this
be
is what
like maybe you have
this
to
is
change
what I
your
was
deck every
referring
3 years.
to. This is what I was referring to earlier. I don't know if that works for Yu-Gi-Oh because what 5 cards do you rotate out of Orchest or Sky Striker to use an example that you're very familiar with? What 5 cards do you rotate out of Sky Striker without like Sky Striker losing its identity?
Well, that would depend on if we're doing archetypes in the sets or not,
Yeah, but
for
that's
stuff.
where
But
I think that difference between Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic comes in. Because if you rotate out Counterspell for blue, you can replace that. But if you're
well,
rotating out Kagari, I think like it's over for Sky
Well, probably
Striker.
well,
just one of the
actually,
newer striker cards, right? Rather than the
I,
core
Okay.
stuff, right? Like
well,
Kagari,
actually, I think it would be like
Ray,
this.
Engage, Widow Anchor, like these feel very core to
Yeah.
striker.
Like, I think it would be like this. You would have you're just like, okay, we're printing Sky Striker into this set. You would have Ray, Engage, Kagari, Shizuku,
Yeah.
multi-roll, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
Widow Anchor, right?
Yeah.
You would have those cards, and then the next you would just play different normal spells and quick play spells or continuous spells in your deck
Mhm.
up until the last rotation of when Engage actually rotates out,
Okay.
and then you would have to just play a different deck.
Okay.
But for that like 3 year period of time, you're playing Sky Striker. You
Mhm.
would just change the spells that you play over time.
So you're saying like it's not Engage that's rotating out, it's Upstart Goblin.
Yes, it's
And
Upstart
I'm gonna
Goblin.
have to find a
It's
replacement
Wolf
for
Etc.
Upstart Goblin because obviously I was playing Upstart Goblin in my Sky Striker deck, but now I'm gonna have to change it up.
And now you have to play. Now you're going to play Call by the Grave, but you can't play it
Okay.
anymore. So now
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
play
Yeah.
Regeki instead because Regeki's in standard now.
Hmm. That,
So,
I feel like
yeah,
this could
that would
work.
work. That would work, I think.
yeah,
Hmm.
and that's basically how Magic does it. But there would come a time, like 3 years later, after you pick these Sky Striker cards in your standard deck, that they would all of the Sky Striker deck would rotate out,
Yes,
and
but
you just
and
have to pick.
then
You just have to
I
pick a new
guess
deck.
technically from that perspective, that would still have been a better time for you, or a better, at least you had the opportunity to play Sky Striker somewhere else that isn't modern, where it's just not good enough anymore.
Yes, and you
But I
would play
guess
it
at
for
that
three
point,
years.
as a Sky Striker player, you had no other alternative other than I'm gonna go back to modern because that's the only place where my Sky Striker stuff's legal now.
And you could do that, or
You
you
could do
could
that.
not. You could do that, or you could not, or you could just pick a different deck to play that's not Sky Striker if you still want to play
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, but I once again, that from the perspective of a standard player, I guess that would suck. But from the perspective of a Yu-Gi-Oh player now, that would still be more ways to play Sky Striker than not having that option for 3 years at all.
right. And the same thing to make it more current. The same thing for Six Samurai. Say they put all the Six Samurai cards in standard, and you could just play the deck plus whatever other cards are in standard, and then for the next 3 years, all of those core cards that you get for Six Samurai plus other cards that they would print into the standard set hypothetically,
Mm.
you would get to play like Six Samurai United or whatever other card you get to play, and then later on you just play different. You would say like one of the cards gets rotated, and you play like a generic level 4 monster that can special summon itself
Hmm.
because like that's what you have to play now.
Yeah.
And then you get to do that for 3 years, and then that Six Samurai core would rotate out, and you have to play a new deck. Like, would you want to do that? You know?
I mean, I would like to do that. Yeah, I would play both probably, but I would appreciate the option to just check in with that format and see if it's fun right now, and if there is any of my deck, because there is a higher likelihood of some of my pet decks being able to be played in that format if they ever get legacy support. I mean, I have experienced that thing where a deck that I really liked just wasn't good enough in modern, right? That
Yeah.
is, yeah.
You would get to play Paleo. They would just put all the Paleos and
If
totally
they
awesome
reprint
in there,
Paleo
right?
and give me support finally, yeah.
Yeah, they would just put Paleo, all the Paleo traps and Opaminia and Anomalocaris in there, but they wouldn't have Totally Awesome because that's too good, right? And then they
That's fucked
have
up.
they have all those cards, and then you just through the rotations, through the standard sets that come out, you just get to pick whatever normal trap cards you want to play, and that sounds like a pretty awesome time to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think in a world where that just exists and both formats are a functioning system, like you've established it, it's a win-win once that actually is in place.
Yeah, that's like a win-win-win with like 14 wins after that.
Yeah. The only negative that I could think of earlier is like technically, but it's not really a negative. It's a negative from their perspective. Is like they're reprinting cards into the main sets that they could have reprinted in other places, but I mean technically they could still do that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it sounds like from a business perspective there might be some issues like financially with a lot of these suggestions, right? Um, which I mean players don't
um,
care about, but I don't know. It's like where. So I guess like the next question and step from here would be like, what is the purpose and what is the role of side sets and what are they trying to facilitate? I guess.
I mean, you could, if you think side sets are just not relevant enough anymore with that concept, you could also move the reprint package from the main sets to the side sets, which would make the main sets less draftable,
Yeah,
but like,
so that's one thing I didn't want to happen,
yeah,
right? Because I think
yeah.
I would love to be able to just buy
You
core
wouldn't
sets.
want that, but wouldn't that be a more realistic way it would happen?
It probably would be realistic, yeah,
Yeah,
if
like
this
let's
was
be honest, the
implemented.
more realistic way it would happen is probably like in a world where they even ever consider this, it's like, well, the main core set booster is just going to stay the way it is. That's where you're going to get your Six Samurai card, the new Six Samurai cards from, and we're going to throw you the Six Samurai reprints in a different set, which obviously from a consumer perspective would be worse, but like it'd be a more realistic, I think, thing to happen, right?
Hmm.
well, that would also be interesting because you have these core Six Samurai cards, and then your Six Samurai cards that you got at first would rotate, but you have like a different set that came out afterwards that you still get to play with for like 8 months of the different
They
Six
would
Samurai
probably be
cards,
released very close to each other in order for them
or
to not
6 months,
float
yeah.
around without being playable. Yeah.
Yeah, or like 6 months later, you get to like your foundation's Six Samurai cards are still legal, but like a few of like your Shien rotated.
Hmm.
so like you had to play with like different Six Samurai cards. It
Yeah.
would be a little bit weird to do it that way, but I mean, it'd still like be able to work, I think.
I
But
do
the
think
mo-
I,
yeah,
I
go
do
ahead.
think one risk from a business perspective that I'm just guessing is there because I'm not too experienced with that sort of stuff, but like just thinking about it from the perspective of, well, a probable outcome for this is that you're gonna have slightly less interest in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Because some people are, maybe not everyone, but some people would definitely go like, I'm only gonna play standard format now, right? And so a
Okay.
positive effect that could have is like, okay, well now
Let's
maybe
phase out modern.
well, modern also gets cheaper, right? Because there's less interest in the cards. But does that also transition into, well, now there going to be more demand for the product that way if you just split your community?
I think there would be more demand for the product, right? Because it's product that is used into both of the formats still.
But most cards wouldn't be, right? Like for example, let's just say hypothetically, Snake Eye and Six Samurai are in the same set, right? And if there's only modern, um, very simplified example, everyone's going to need the Snake Eye cards, right? So like, let's say you have 100 players, everyone needs 3 Snake Eye Ashes. Your demand for Snake Eye Ash is there needs to be 300 of them. And the demand for the Six Samurai, once again, very simplified, is 0 because they're unplayable, right? So people need to open product until 300 Snake Eye Ashes have been pulled. But then in the world where we split the formats, you're going to have 50% of people playing Snake Eye in one format and 50% of people playing Six Samurai in the other. Suddenly you have demand for 150 Snake Eyes and 150 Six Samurai cards, but they are being pulled in less product, right?
It
Like yes, I think that like like this example that we're giving, the foundations and having things draftable,
Hmm.
I think it's actually better. Actually, I think it actually gives Konami more money,
It
right?
might.
Because
I'm just throwing this
because
out
now,
there because
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
definitely other effects happening, right? There's people
Yes.
joining the game that didn't play before and stuff like that. It's just like I'm throwing this out there because I do think if you have some people stop playing modern and start playing standard, there's going to be less demand for those cards. I do think, unless it's a good deck in both formats.
Um. Yes, but since you can play each format independently, like there
Hmm.
might be like a little bit less demand,
Yeah.
but there's going to be a lot of people that play both.
That's yeah, no, that's I'm just saying there's
Yeah.
some uncertainty to it though, right? That's
Yes,
like
there
that is
is.
an assumption that
mhm.
might be true and it might be a huge win, but it could also not be true and then that's where the risk comes in.
Well, you just
Right.
have
Right.
to
That is right.
give you just have to give people a reason to want to open that set outside of, I guess, just the meta cards, right?
Yeah.
So that would just be like bringing in other things outside of pack filler and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of other. There's obviously a lot of other things you could do. You could also
Yeah.
throw in the orchestra reprints instead of just having them be a common. They could also just be exclusively a QCR, whatever. It should be a chase card for the standard players or something like that.
Yeah. So you would have to
I
just find ways to give people a reason to want to get
I'm just
other
saying.
the other
I'm
product.
pretty sure from a marketing perspective, it goes a little deeper than what we're just seeing right now.
For sure, yeah.
yeah. I do think that making like the foundation set draftable, you would not be just be introducing the one format. You would actually be introducing two formats. So
Yes,
I think it's a
even if
net.
it's just
It's a net. I think it's a
unofficially,
net
people
positive. Yeah.
would draft. Yeah. Yeah.
And then from there, you would get domain format, which you guys should go watch Josh's video with Card Market on, right? Like
We
you.
should play the main format at some point. That for it's very fun. It's very fun.
I mean, it does sound
I
Um,
really
don't
interesting.
think I've played that.
It's just Commander Yu-Gi-Oh.
Oh,
So it's
oh, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to play. Okay, I do want to play that.
yeah.
yeah, it's something to explore for sure. Because I recently like watched the video on it. I guess I'm gonna watch Josh's at some point, but it is something that people have been talking about. You know, just to freshen up the game and stuff like that. And the benefit is, I think, because of everything we've talked about, like you would be able to just use formats like that, even like community made ones. Because I think like something maybe one day has to come from the community, right? And I think Magic is the biggest representation of that.
Yeah.
The fact that your game has the number one format being Commander, which is something made up by the players,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that is really fascinating,
Yeah.
but really opens up a lot of room for creativity for us as players in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I feel like we sometimes don't get the creativity to do that kind of stuff in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I just feel like maybe the way the product is designed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't allow for that type of creativity. You would, I think, in Yu-Gi-Oh! To create an alternative format, you really have to go out of your way to sit down and just make another format.
And that's actually a good testing ground for like what it could be in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Because in Magic, like you can see that it already worked. Like you can see that like fans made up a format and it became the most popular format in the game and also supported by Wizards of the Coast. So because that already happened, you already know that it could happen.
I mean, to an extent, it is. I feel like always gonna work like that in some ways. Where I don't know if you, because you said you started playing Magic relatively late, like recent. I mean, recently is not true. It's like 5 or 6 years or whatever. But
Yeah.
The grand scheme of Magic, it's recent, yeah.
yeah, like I don't know
Yes.
if you know if you've ever looked into the history of Magic. Did the other formats just randomly spawn because Wizards said so, or is it also something that was popularized because people just started complaining or doing that, or you know?
I'm not sure since I wasn't playing Magic back then,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
I do know the guy that like in essence created Modern. His name is
Mhm.
Gavin Verhey. He's very popular in the Magic community,
Mhm.
and he was a competitive Magic player. And I'm not sure what spawned that, or maybe it was off of Twitter. And he, I don't know actually how it spawned,
Mhm.
but he created the Modern format, and it became like one of the most popular forms of playing Magic.
And he
Um,
created it as a player?
he was a competitive player. He now works for Wizards, but in essence, yes. Like there was a lot of people
Okay.
involved, obviously, but he was like one of the front runners of it.
Okay. The thing I take away from this is that I feel like it would be a positive thing if we could make it happen, but ultimately there are risks attached to it for the company, so you probably, or we as a community probably have to like in some ways make them see that we want it, that the demand is there in like enough, like in a big enough fashion to the point where they feel safe
And
doing it. Because I do think in some ways this did happen with Time Wizard, with Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like you can tell, even though of course like Time Wizard isn't like the most supported out there, there is support for it, and we are there is progress in that direction, right? Like the Time Wizard is now getting recognition at official events. They did make that a way to play Yu-Gi-Oh at sanctioned tournaments. You can have Time Wizard tournaments with prize support and judges allocated to it, and they even do cater some amount of reprints to that in like the rarity collection. I don't think the nostalgia pool happening right now in the most recent rarity collection is a complete coincidence with the fact that like Edison format is so popular now. So
and
I do think there is at least a possibility that they do see these ways that people enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh, and if they see enough people enjoying Yu-Gi-Oh in that fashion, then I think they could see a demand in it.
yeah, and the only way that happens is if people like really always play it, is like play it a
Yeah,
lot, and that's honestly how Commander grew
yeah,
to begin with. Because I mean, Commander's been a thing for over 10 years, but it was
yeah,
only recently only recently did, or more than that, probably 15 years.
yeah.
Only in the past like 10 years or 8 years has not Konami, sorry, has Wizards of the Coast printed cards for Commander, recognized Commander, and started building that into their business model.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's only it will take a long time and it happens gradually, but I think when people actually play it and play it a lot and request for it and always play it at YCSs, always play it when the eyes are watching,
Mm.
that's what gets it into the limelight. Like when they're watching, if a lot of people are playing it, it will happen.
But the biggest problem I think with Yu-Gi-Oh is like we would have to basically popularize something like domain, right? Like because this idea of us wanting to have an alternative format with rotation, I mean, I don't know how you would really get eyes on that, right? I don't know how you would like. I think it's something that can't be done like from a community perspective because it's such a tall order and it requires people to faithfully follow like a standard Yu-Gi-Oh format, and it just feels
Mm.
like something that has to be done at like the company level to encourage it.
From like I think the rough part about the rotation one is you do need like a central um
Design team.
person or designer that decides what stuff is in the core set, right? Like you can't just be like, hey, like Commander is not changing up the card pool. It's just a different rule set that you play by, right? You just sit down with people. You say, oh, we all bring 100 individual cards and we play a four-way game, right? It's not like you don't have to argue about what cards are legal or not. It's not like you have to reach a central agreement on this set is now in this format or anything like that, right? So I do think that it be difficult from a community perspective, but not completely impossible. Like I could see this kind of thing starting out as like a series that a couple of I don't know Yugi tubers play by and just see how it goes, and then maybe people see like, hey, this format actually makes it so that you can play six samurais, and then they'll try it out. But it's just like it would probably be a very long-winded journey, right?
Yeah, and I think the question about getting eyes in front of it is like just something like this. Like if you don't, Konami's watching a lot. Konami's watching, you Josh, you Farfa. Konami's watching MBT. Konami's watching these card market, like these companies and productions of these formats that are quote unquote made up that people are playing, and they can guarantee you they see how many eyeballs are watching certain things, and if and I think it has bigger of an impact than you think.
Yeah, for sure. So it could be something to it could be something we see in the future. I'm not super hopeful, but regardless of what happens, I think like I like the modern game. My problems with it don't really stem from like gameplay related things.
Mm.
I think it is just the in terms of gameplay. One thing I would love to see is drafting. Which is why something like rotation is important to me. So that's kind of something that I hope gets implemented in some shape and form, because I think that's what rotation does really well, is let you draft, because I've just personally fallen in love with cubing recently. But to summarize everything we've said, I feel like the online approach is definitely the way to first take dip their toes into, so that's sort of my conclusionary remarks on everything as we wrap this up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think what you said, Farfa, is so on the nose about try it out online.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way. Somehow get it into Master Duel, and if people love it, that's going to be your best sample size, and take it from there. But I think that's the best idea that you've given.
Josh, any closing sort of thoughts and stuff?
I mean, nothing really to add. I do think it was a pretty productive talk. I'm pretty happy with the agreements we've reached, and I do think overall it is something that unfortunately probably has to come from the community for now. But I don't think it's impossible, and that's kind of a cool thing to think about.
James, thank you so
Well,
much for
I'd like
joining
to.
us. Oh, go on.
Yeah. I would be excited to hear somehow from Yu-Gi-Oh players, either in the Twitch chat or on social media, of what they actually think about this, because it's fun to talk about it with you guys, but it's even more fun to watch what people actually think about what we said.
Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on the comment section. So of course you will be seeing this the day after we film this. And I'm sure there will be so many of you who, and again, it's really amazing to see people who have played other games to such a deep extent. And one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on is like you have had very, very prominent success at Yu-Gi-Oh! In the competitive sphere, and you are very much like a Magic player now. And I think it's such an interesting perspective. So likewise, for people commenting and stuff, it'll be really interesting to see any positives and negatives we've missed with regards to rotation in Yu-Gi-Oh! And just the general thoughts, because I think there is so much here. It is a really deep rabbit hole. But yeah, thanks again to our guest James for taking part today. It's been a pleasure. Amazing to have you on, and I think it's been a really, really good. Like, this is generally one of my top podcasts I feel like we've done. I think we really discovered a lot of things and came to some really interesting conclusions about how this could work. And I'm glad we had this discussion. So check
You heard it here first. We peaked.
We literally like fixed the game. Honestly, as far as I'm concerned, we straight up fixed the game.
I think we actually did.
Check out James' channel if you want to see some of his Magic content. Link will be in the description as always. And again, appreciate all of the Patreons. I did not pull out a specific question, but I'm reading through all of them. We definitely covered pretty much all of it. Except the guy who asked, what do you guys think about tabletop Yu-Gi-Oh? No, we don't need figures and holograms just yet. Anyway, go like, subscribe. Peace out. See you next time.
Bye.